Could I have council take their seats, please? We're going to get started. Doug will be back in a moment. Doug will be back. Doug will be back. Okay, are we all ready to get started?
All right, let's do it.
Okay, we're going to get started. Okay, everybody, the mics are on. We're ready. I'll give them the thumbs up here. Good evening, everybody. This is Tuesday, June 28th at 6:30 in the evening, and this is a study session for Littleton City Council. We just came from a meet and greet out at Berry Park, so we're still dressed kind of casually and kind of recovering from being out in that heat. We have, at this moment, 3 council members missing. One will be here shortly. Doug Clark will be here shortly. And then we have 2 other council members who are absent, Mayor Pro Tem Brinkman and Council Member Cernanek. We have an agenda tonight. The agenda needs one modification on it. The requirement will be to add an item to the agenda. It'll be item D, which means that we'll change D to E and E to F. And that's going to be to follow up on the Santa Fe and Bellevue plans presented by the staff, same staff that's going to do B and C, and they're going to just include that little bit for D. So again, that's an agenda item change. Adding D, which is follow up on Santa Fe and Bellevue plans presented by the same staff that's doing B and C, and that changes D to E and E to F. With that, we've got several topics tonight. Some of them a little more time allotted than others, so we'll try to move along. The goal is to get out of the staff study session by around 9 o'clock to 9:30 at the latest. And we think that we have enough time there to give adequate discussion of all these items and do it in 2.5 to 3 hours. So we'll also have to take some breaks and do some shifting around of people, et cetera. So right now at the table we have council, and the topic is going to be the National Research Center presentation of the 2016 Business and Resident Surveys. And I'll do one other announcement. I'll wait for Doug to come back on it, but to say it again. But we have a Tri-Cities meeting on Wednesday morning. We didn't get notice of that until just a couple days ago, and I was unaware of it also. So it's going to be at the Englewood City Council or City Center. And Joe Jefferson, the mayor in Englewood, is the one who's presenting it. So a Tri-Cities meeting tomorrow morning at 7:30 if you can make it. So then back to National Research Center, presentation of 2016 Business and Resident Surveys. Kelly is going to make the presentation and introduction.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Kelly Nardi. I'm the Director of Communications and Marketing for the city. I'm just going to give you a really brief overview. We are presenting the results of the 2016 resident and business surveys. This is an overview of the surveys. The full results were provided to you last week, and we'll get those posted on our website soon. This is the third time that we've done the surveys. We did them in 2012, 2014, and now in 2016. So we're starting to establish some trend lines, and I think you'll find that interesting. We worked with the National Research Center out of Boulder. They have done more than 1,000 surveys for cities and local governments all across the country. The purpose of the data is for performance measurement, council goal setting, and strategic planning. NRC is a partner with the International City Managers Association. The 2 previous times we did this survey, we did it in the fall. We were advised this year to do it a little earlier because of the presidential election. Mail surveys, it's not really good timing to do it during a presidential election because there's a lot of direct mail pieces in people's mailboxes. So we didn't want it to get overlooked, and we moved it up by about 4 or 5 months. I've worked closely with Lori Urban on each of these 3 surveys. She's a senior research associate. Madeline Winslow is a survey specialist, and she's here to observe. And Ashley Perez de Tejada is going to do the presentation for you. So I'm going to turn that over to Ashley, and there'll be some time for question and answer. Thank you.
Is my mic on? Sounds like it
And
is.
Ashley, can you wait just a moment? We're going
Sure.
to verify that we're actually on the air. We've had some problems with
Okay,
this
no
room.
problem.
While we're waiting for Cindy to get a couple more chairs, sure to get some more.
There's some chairs down in the end there.
Channel 8 is how it's, but we do have recordings and YouTube.
Sure.
Can anyone hear on Channel 8, or is it just totally out?
Channel 8's out.
Oh, okay. So Ashley, we're ready to get started again.
Okay,
And for the information of everybody in the room, we have another technical problem with the equipment. Channel 8 will not be on at all, so people watching on Channel 8 aren't going to see this. However, it's going to be on the website, and it's going to be recorded on the video. So we have 2 of the 3 will be working for information. Channel 8, though, I don't know when that'll get repaired. That could be a while. So Ashley, we're waiting. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, it sounds like my mic's working, which is great. And I just want to say thank you to Kelly for the wonderful introduction, and another special thanks to her, because as she mentioned, she's been working with Lori on this for the last 3 years, and she's an integral part of this process, and she's been a pleasure to work with, so thank you for that. I'm happy to be here to present the results of the, as Kelly mentioned, resident and business surveys, and this is the 3rd time that we've conducted it. And as you guys have mentioned as well, it sounds like you have a lot to get through this evening, so I will try to be quick, but also leave time to ask questions. All right, so for the sake of time, I'm going to do some quick survey method rundown, and then we're going to jump right into the key findings. We did do the 2 separate surveys, the resident and the business. And for the resident survey, we mailed to 3,000 random households in the city of Littleton. From that, we received 699 completes, which garnered a 24% response rate. There was a few additional responses in 2016 compared to 2014, but the additional responses did not change the response rate or the margin of error in this case. We rated the results to make sure that they were applicable to the city as a whole. And then where there were comparisons to the 2012 and 14 surveys, and also to our national benchmark comparison database and our Front Range benchmarks, we made those comparisons. For the business survey, we mailed an invite to 1,000 random businesses. We selected them from the list that the city provided of about over 2,000 businesses in the city. From that, we received 114 completes, which gave us a 12% response rate. And this year, we received a few additional responses to the business survey as well. And that did lend itself to 1% better difference in the response rate overall. That survey had a plus or minus 9% margin of error, and similar to the resident survey where there were comparisons we could make to the previous surveys we did. So the first key finding is that residents and business owners continue to enjoy a high quality of life here in Littleton. We can see that that's the case because roughly 9 in 10 residents and business owners and managers stated that the overall quality of life in Littleton was excellent or good. And at least 3/4 of residents or more rated the remaining aspects of quality of life favorably. And as you can see denoted by the stars, Littleton was rated either higher or much higher than both the national and the Front Range benchmarks. All of these items were similar in 2014 to 2016 for both the resident and the business surveys. And one thing I forgot to mention, but going forward, we've attempted to color code the resident survey and business survey results. So anything that's in blue is going to be resident and anything in brown is going to be business to help make that connotation for you. Another aspect of quality of life in any neighborhood or any city, of course, is feeling safe. And results show that in Littleton, not only did residents feel safe, it was the second most cited reason that they live in the city of Littleton. Additionally, about 9 in 10 or more residents stated that they agree the city is a safe community and the city has a low crime rate. And you can see that over the course of the 3 survey iterations that has remained stable here in Littleton. Businesses appreciated various characteristics of the community as well, with about 9 in 10 stating that the overall appearance and the cleanliness of Littleton was excellent or good. Additionally, at least 2/3 of business owners and managers thought there was the right amount of festivals, concerts, bars and taverns, retail shopping opportunities, and public art. So they appreciated that in the city. This was similar to results that we saw in 2014, both in the overall appearance and cleanliness, and then the amount of these items in the city. Our second key finding was that residents appreciate aspects of travel, but mobility overall is an area of concern for both sets of respondents. So overall, ease of travel by light rail, including in downtown Littleton and at the Mineral Avenue Light Rail Station, was evaluated by 8 and 10 as excellent or good. The Mineral Avenue Light Rail Station was pulled out of the question in this survey iteration. And so it could not be compared to 2014, but the other items, the ease of travel by light rail overall and ease of walking in the city, were all similarly rated in 2016 to 2014. And additionally, the ease of travel by light rail overall and the ease of walking in the city were rated much higher in Littleton compared to both the national benchmarks and the Front Range benchmarks. And while residents did appreciate certain aspects of travel, street maintenance was rated by about 4 in 10 as excellent or good, which was lower in 2016 compared to 2014. Additionally, businesses felt that the ease of walking and the travel by bicycle was less favorable in 2016 compared to 2014, though about 3/4 or more did rate ease of walking and travel by bicycle as excellent or good. In the resident survey, the residents were asked, what is the most pressing issue facing Littleton in the next 2 years? And the top two most cited items there were traffic in general and street maintenance. And these increased in their percentages over the course of the 2 years. So these are becoming a higher priority for residents over the course of the survey iterations. Traffic congestion is maybe an area for improvement as well. This was assessed by both residents and businesses, though asked in different ways. On the resident survey, residents were asked the percentage of, or how well traffic congestion was in the city, and about 34% stated it was excellent or good. This was stable between 2014 and 2016. And in the business survey, businesses were asked to what percent was traffic congestion a moderate or major problem in the city, and over half stated that it was at least a moderate problem. And as you can see by that arrow, that has increased over the course of the survey iterations. It's important to note, though, here that the amount of growth occurring in the Front Range over the last few years in many of the Front Range communities, everybody's experiencing the growing pains of that. So it definitely is something that everybody's experiencing, and we affectionately call it a symptom of success. When people want to come and live in your city, they're going to bring more people, and you're just not going to be able to quite keep up with the growth. Our third key finding is that residents feel positively about the city government's performance, but business owners rated it less favorably. As you can see, residents' ratings of government performance were good. At least 2/3 or more stated that the direction the city is taking, the quality of work provided by City of Littleton employees, and the overall direction the city is taking was rated as excellent or good. And the overall direction the city is taking was rated higher than the national benchmarks in this case. All of these items remained stable across 2014 and 2016. Meanwhile, businesses rated aspects of government performance a little less favorably, but all of these items, though these items trended downwards, they are similar to the national and front range benchmarks. Oh, I'm sorry. On the business side, we didn't do benchmarks, but so these items did trend downwards between 2014 and 2016. However, when business owners and managers were asked about their interactions with city employees, they rated them favorably. Roughly 3/4 stated their overall impression was excellent or good, and 4 out of 5 felt that their interaction with city employees, when talking with them, they were respectful, they were courteous, they were accessible, and they were knowledgeable. Our fourth key finding is that residents regard city services highly and highlighted services they feel are high importance but lower quality. So overall, resident evaluations of quality of services was excellent or good by about 8 in 10 residents. This was similar to what we saw in 2014, and again, it was higher than the national benchmarks and similar to the front range benchmarks. Additionally, at least half of residents gave positive ratings to the quality of 28 of the 31 individual city services, and we're going to get into that a little bit further in the following slides. So this is a complicated schematic, and I'm going to try and go over it quickly. The survey respondents were asked to evaluate both the quality and the importance of those 31 services provided by the City of Littleton. And we then placed those services into the 4 quadrants that you see there based on those ratings, with importance along the vertical y-axis and quality along the horizontal x-axis. And you can see that the importance threshold was above or below 72%, and the threshold for the quality was above or below 80%. So it's worth noting that overall, a majority of respondents, again, gave positive ratings to all of these services. And the most positive quality ratings were awarded to the Littleton Fire Rescue, Littleton Museum, Hudson Gardens, Bemis Library, to the city's Parks and Trails, and for the 4th of July fireworks show. All of these received excellent or good ratings by 9 in 10 respondents. The items that received less favorable ratings by respondents less than majority were traffic flow, job opportunities, and downtown parking. Another important note is that most of the quality ratings remained stable between 2014 and 2016, but the 4th of July fireworks show, the Littleton Police Department, the Candlelight Walk, and shopping opportunities improved over that time. And the household hazmat roundup, leaf and tire recycling, and snow plowing declined over that same amount of time. So this is actually just a drilled down version of that top left quadrant, which is actually where you want to put most of your focus in, because those are the higher importance, lower quality items. So this is just another graphical representation of that. So there were 7 total items that fell within this quadrant compared to other services and amenities. It's important to note that all these items, with the exception of traffic flow, were rated as excellent or good by half or more of residents. And additionally, most of these items for which there were comparisons, because not all of these could be compared, were similar to or higher than the benchmarks, except for snow plowing, which was lower than both the front range benchmarks and the national benchmarks, and traffic flow, which was lower than just the front range benchmarks. This graph in the report would be a great thing to review in greater detail, because this will allow you to do some more investigation, perhaps with some other data that you have, look at some trend items to see what would be the particular reason why these ended up in this quadrant. But again, something like traffic flow is just going to be, example of just growth in the city. So this slide is demonstrating a couple different things. First, residents were asked how important 10 potential future projects were for the City of Littleton in the next 5 to 8 years on a scale of not all important to essential. And maintaining and improving city's infrastructure was new to the 2016 survey, and it received an essential or very important rating by almost 9 in 10 residents. The other 2 received an essential or very important rating by at least 2/3. And beyond that, once the residents had rated each of these as essential or very important, they were asked to rate which of these 10 projects were the most important in the city to focus on. And so these are the top 3 that were selected in that category. This is just kind of an overview and summary of how Littleton performed against the national and the Front Range benchmarks. You can see that Littleton is doing very well. The majority of their ratings were higher than the national benchmark. 6 were similar and only 2 were lower. And the similar pattern is seen with the Front Range benchmarks, again, the majority of which are in the higher section. 7 are lower, or 7 are similar and 4 are lower. Our 5th key finding is that residents and business owners seem to support tax increases. And so both the resident and business surveys asked residents how much they supported a 0.75% sales and use tax increase in order to support needed improvements within the city. And roughly a similar proportion of residents and business owners and managers stated that they at least somewhat supported the measure. You can see that residents strongly support the measure slightly more than businesses, but there's definitely some good support for it there. Additionally, I believe this aligns very well with the slide before that demonstrated that residents felt maintaining and improving the city infrastructure was the #1 top priority in the city, and that was rated as essential or very important by 9 in 10 residents. So this is kind of showing that residents are willing to kind of put their money where their mouth is. When asked about preferences for the sales and use tax amounts, again, you'll see similar percentages between residents and business owners and managers. The majority suggested that they would rather pay the 1-cent sales and use tax increase to make those improvements happen faster. And the fewest residents and business owners and managers said that they'd pay a less sales and tax use increase to make those improvements happen over a shorter or a longer period of time. There was also a question about the support for a lodging tax. This question was worded very specifically, as you can see there, to denote that this would come solely from hotel room visitors. And again, about 7 in 10, both of residents and business owners and managers, stated that they would support at least somewhat a lodging tax. Our final key finding is that most residents look for city information in the Littleton Report and on the city's website. So residents were asked to indicate to what degree 12 sources of information were utilized as at least a minor or major source about city information. And these are the top 3 most cited sources. Again, the Littleton Report being the #1, the city's website being 2nd, the Littleton Independent being 3rd. This slide is important because it demonstrates the sources that could be used to disseminate the information about our surveys to the residents and possibly to promote further information about the tax items that you had on the survey. Because ultimately, citizens are your #1 customer, and they're obviously interested in learning more about city activities. So I'll go ahead and open it up for questions.
Questions, Jerry?
Yes, just a couple questions. Thank you for the report. It's
Thank
well
you,
done.
yes.
Just a couple questions. When I was looking through comparing both the resident and the business, on the resident side where it says importance of parking downtown areas 1% as an issue for them apparently, whereas on the business side it's a 53% or kind of higher. What should we make of that?
I imagine that it has a lot more to do with business owners and managers work downtown, so they're more concerned about it, or perhaps their customers have complained about it, and maybe residents don't feel that it's necessarily an issue.
Well, yeah, that is what it says. But there's such a difference between the two.
It's hard for me to say what exactly might be the cause of that, but we could certainly add additional questions about it on future surveys if it's something that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to know why we have such a large.
Yeah, definitely a big difference.
And my second question then, on the business report where it talks about the festivals, bars, entertainments, where everything is rated right amount, is there maybe something, and it's been that way, I think, for the last 3 years. Is there, I'm just kind of, some of it's maybe going up.
Yeah, I
In fact,
think.
the whole report, for the most part, the questions are either just marginally going up or marginally going down.
Right, yeah, there weren't a lot of significant differences. The only item that residents felt there weren't enough of were actually farmers markets, of all the items listed there. Otherwise, everything is pretty much maintaining question.
So what do we make of it then when we see year after year, it's pretty much rated the same?
I think that means that you're probably doing a good job.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Ask
Bill.
the question again.
Wonder, how often do you see in your surveys that people want to have a tax increase? If I read that right, well over 50% of the town either supports it or strongly supports it. I find that surprising.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question. I think on the one hand, it's important, and I'll go back to that slide just to, it's important to kind of look at the strongly support more so than the middle guys, because the strongly support are willing to say, yes, if it became a ballot measure, I would most likely vote for it. Whereas the somewhat support and somewhat opposed are the folks that are in the in-between. So while 7 in 10 or more people would support it, it's hard to say whether it would specifically pass. Overall, I can't say that we have any data about tax increases overall, but generally it's not something that people enjoy to see is a tax increase.
But do you find this surprising?
I think, again, it relates back to that other slide about how residents really do want that, they want maintenance and improvements within the city. And so if this is what it takes to get there, then they're willing to do it.
Didn't we have a vote on that, on the hotel tax?
We did some years ago and it failed, but, that was also before we had as many hotels as we do now. We
Sure.
have 3 or 4 hotels and
And also, Councilman Rowley, to your question, this year there was specific language that was added to direct those if, for instance, if someone supported the hotel tax, it was specific to promotion and marketing of the community of the city of Littleton. Whereas before, I believe it was just straight general fund dollars. So this would be more of an earmarked proposal, but again, yeah.
Additional questions? Do we have any other questions? Well, it's a very long report. Thank you.
It is.
We had a lot of homework to read through that.
Well, 2 separate pieces of homework.
Yeah, yeah, and it was very complete, and it was really interesting,
Thank you.
and especially some of the comparisons between what business's point of view was and citizens' point of view. One comment is, and you made it at the beginning, the degree of error is kind of high on the businesses, 9%. So it's helpful, but you wouldn't want to pin it down, for instance, on the tax measures, I think,
Sure.
and 4% on the residences. But this is a very interesting, and also I thought the clear interest in doing infrastructure and traffic matters, I think, stood out. And
Absolutely.
so that is a significant thing.
Didn't need a survey on that.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Peggy.
I do have one question. I understand strongly support, because I think people will vote for that. Somewhat support seems to me iffy, that we can't absolutely conclude that people would actually vote for that. It may depend on what the weather is on the day that they vote, and they just are upset because they're getting soppy wet or whatever.
Yes.
So we have to be careful.
Absolutely. Although, I agree with that wholeheartedly, but I think also the fact that people would rather pay a higher sales and use tax increase demonstrates that they're wanting the improvements made. Again, you can't make comparisons directly, and to your point, depending on when you ask, it could change, but I think these are strong correlations.
Yeah, and indeed, what we say it's going to go for.
Exactly,
Right,
yeah, that's important.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, I'd like to thank National Research Center, and it becomes more significant as we do 3 years of it, and as we are able to look at the Front Range and look at other national cities and get a sense of the things we do really well over and above the Front Range and the national cities. I think that's just a really significant thing. We should be proud as a city of the work we do. So, and also thank you for bringing it to our attention. We're going to move, with that, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And we're going to move to agenda item B, but we have to do a little shifting. So let's take about a 2-minute break.
Yeah, and that was their about.
For agenda items B, C, and D, remember that's a corrected agenda item D to include the follow-up on the Santa Fe and Bellevue plans. We're going to meet and talk about 3 different issues. We have with us for the first one, which is discussion with the planning board regarding mineral light rail planning process status update. And this is going to be presented by staff and by PUMA. PUMA stands for Progressive Urban Management Associates, and they have been working in the city now for several months on the mineral station. And I would like to introduce Jocelyn, who will make the introductions of PUMA.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So question, could we have a teensy bit more light?
So it's either one, the way it was earlier, or this way. So that's the option.
Okay, well, I thought we could see okay before.
You want to try it?
That's how we work.
The screen will read a lot better with the lights dim.
Yeah, but I could see the screen before.
Yeah, we were okay before. Let's try it again,
just-
if you would.
Feels like I'm in a subversive meeting. Maybe I am. Yeah,
I'm really okay with that. Are you all?
It's gonna be really difficult to see the drawings with this much light.
You can turn off the screen lights. There we go.
There you go.
They're all tied together.
So, Mike, pull out your list, and that's just one more thing for it. Okay, so again, we're going to introduce Puma and Jocelyn to go with agenda item B.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yes, this is, as Mayor said, this is an update on the Mineral Light Rail Station planning process. And this is the second update that Puma is presenting to both Planning Board and City Council of where the project is at in the process. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad Siegel and JJ Folsom from Puma.
Thank you. Do we need to be speaking in microphones for the recording?
Yes.
So I think this. Whoa.
Well, that won't work.
That won't work.
You want one of these?
That'd be great. So, thank you. Thanks for having us. I think we were last before joint session in February when we were just kicking off the project. So, thank you. All right. Oh. All right, thank you. I think we've got our audio-visual together now. But it's a pleasure to be back. I think our last joint meeting was in the beginning of the project back in the spring. And so what we're doing tonight is we're reporting on progress with the mineral station plan. And there's several things we just want to run by both Council and Planning Commission. Some of this information, some of you have seen before, so we'll go through it relatively quickly. There are a couple things, though, that are new that we'll try to spend a little bit more time. So community process summary in terms of our outreach with the community. We have had a lot of community input in this process. Open houses early on had more than 150 residents attending. We had visual preference surveys in the council chamber just last month. We had almost another 100 that came between 2 different viewings on that. So in our view, compared to these processes in other communities, Littleton folks are engaged. They're certainly interested in this project. There's a vision that's emerging for the station plan. Market assessment. I think many of you have seen the market assessment, but I will go over the highlights with you tonight. It's very instructive in terms of guiding use options for the station. Preliminary design framework, development precedents. Something that I think will be new for everybody in the room is we did hold a forum a couple weeks back with a group of metro area developers, about 6 or 8 of them. These are developers who don't necessarily have a proprietary interest in the mineral site, but they are seasoned developers that work on transit sites throughout the metro area. So we were able to get some interesting feedback from them in terms of some of the initial concepts and what they thought could be feasible or not so feasible. And then we'll give you a sense of next steps. So again, the purpose of the project, if you'll recall, is really to look at land uses, circulation, open space around the Mineral Station Park and Ride. And we're looking at both quarter-mile and half-mile radii around the station, which really relate to walking distances to a station. In terms of where we are in the process, it's baseball season, so we are somewhere between second and third base right now in this process. So we're running between second and third.
What inning?
Well, hopefully not extra innings, but we're running between second and third, and we're probably about almost seventh inning stretch is where we are. So we've, again, the community input has been great. We've had terrific turnout from it. And we're at the point now where the plan starts to come together. So tonight's meeting is really pretty pivotal. It's an opportunity for council and the Planning Commission to give us some input before some of these ideas start to crystallize, if you will. And then over the next several months, putting together a plan document with delivery to your boards in September and ultimately back to council 1st of October is our timetable. I am going to recap what we heard early on, and again, for many of you, you either participated at our open houses or have seen this information before if you were at our visual preference survey. But a lot of different issues that the community told us they wanted addressed in this planning process. So enhancing pedestrian and bike access from where people live across Santa Fe, across Mineral to the river and the open space. Safety, huge issue, particularly with all the traffic and legitimate anxiety about traffic on Santa Fe and Mineral. There really are heavy traffic loads on those roads. Grade separated crossings was a priority. What that means is people don't necessarily want to wade through traffic to get across those busy roads, but are there ways that people can go over or under, whether they're walking or they're biking? Parking and lighting, that refers more to the station area itself. Those of you who are familiar with the pattern there, those lots fill up by 7 a.m. most mornings. 1,200 spaces filling up routinely. Currently, the Mineral Station is the end of the line, so there's a fairly large capture area for that, which we think is both a challenge and also an opportunity moving forward. Small town character. Just heard about the community survey in terms of satisfaction, resident satisfaction in town, and a lot of that is just the essence of Littleton. This is a key site, a gateway site into Littleton, and a lot of folks we talked to said we really want to make sure that it embodies the essence of what we are. Destination, something unique though. So a destination that the town could be proud of and that a variety of people in town would be proud of going to and would enjoy. Jobs, the sense that this is one of the largest pieces of land left in Littleton, and are there some job-producing uses that would make sense? Also to look at Mineral as not end of the line, if you will, but an opportunity for those living upstream, if folks living in Englewood and Denver, even downtown Denver, a real opportunity for those folks to be coming down here if the right job opportunities could be provided in the vicinity of this station. Neighborhood services. So there were desirable types of retail that the community voiced, notably grocery and Whole Foods, if you want to get specific, was the prototype that people would like to see. But some sort of grocery use there, because apparently it does fill a gap in the market. In terms of development intensity, we would ask individuals, we'd ask residents in our forums how high you want to build there. And every time we got to the 3 or 4 stories, that's where people would start pushing our hands back down a little bit. So there's some tolerance for density and for height there, but views, very important for people who live across from this site. And just a general sense that a 3-4 story building is probably pushing the limits for Littleton. And then, of course, traffic, both current and future traffic, and an understanding that some of this traffic's beyond our control. So with Sterling Ranch, these other developments that are happening, real concern that traffic is just going to increase over time. So the vision that resulted from a lot of our community outreach, and these start to be qualities that we would recommend start to be embodied in the planning principles of the mineral station and the sites around mineral. So the river, this is a unique asset. There's really two unique assets at this site, the transit and the river and the parks around it. There are not many sites, if any, that we could find in Metro Denver that really have these two amenities so close to each other. So the river, the train, how do we capitalize on that? The town brand, that embodying the character of Littleton and making sure that this is a gateway and a welcome to our city. That we need to be sensitive to that moving forward. Connections and the notion of connecting across Santa Fe, across Mineral, in a variety of ways and in modes other than cars. Can we find better ways to walk across, to bike across these major barriers? And then value capture, that's something I'm going to talk about in the context of the market assessment. Can we use these natural assets, the river and then this amazing transit asset, can we use the value from those to really leverage something special at the site? And I'll talk about that as we get into the market assessment. So here we are, market assessment. Pretty interesting site. The area in blue there, those are that's Littleton. The area in yellow there, those are the general boundaries of what we were looking at with the mineral station. And then that red area, that red sort of South Metro area into Highlands Ranch and also west of Littleton, that corresponds to who's using transit right now. Who's using mineral station? So what RTD does is they actually track license plates. They track license plates. They look at the origin of who's parking there, by 7:30 every day. And about 90% of the users of mineral station are in that red capture area, which is fascinating to us. What that tells us, those are people who are already in the habit of going to mineral. And if there's any future development or attraction or destination in that area, these are people that, again, already in the habit of going there. So we did some digging in the market assessment to look at the demographics of that area in red versus Littleton itself. And in the Q&A, if you'd like, we can get into some specifics of some of those differences. So the market assessment, there's two key sort of bottom line conclusions from the market assessment, and these I would suggest have policy implications for both council and the Planning Commission. The first scenario is if we just let the market sort of do its thing. And if we let market forces today, and we know today is a time of explosive growth in Denver Metro. There are some projections of a slowdown within the next year or two, but overall it's not predicted to be anywhere near what we went through 6-7 years ago. So the trend lines are showing continued investment, continued growth. People are still moving here. That's not going to slow down. And when I say people are still moving here, they're moving to Metro Denver and they're moving to South Metro. So if the market sort of dictates what happens to Mineral Station and the environs, this is not a surprising slide for you. You've seen this before. Essentially what the market tells us is that the top two bullets there are really the most marketable uses for a developer of land at that site. Housing and retail. On the housing, what's fueling the market in Metro Denver right now is multifamily, mostly rental, 1 and 2 bedroom unit development. And we see that would be an immediate marketable use at Mineral with the access to the transit. And then retail. And unfortunately, that site, because of the traffic counts, because of all that visibility of the traffic on Santa Fe and Mineral, left to the whims of the marketplace, it is a site that large format general merchandise, which is sort of code word, planner speak for big box, is likely. That's what the market could deliver. Now, embedded with that are some of the things that the community told us they actually want, which is the notion of grocery. That could be a component of that. And then some other items we looked at. We looked at office. We did not see a strong short-term demand just in the marketplace for office. And in terms of industrial, certainly the South Park area, there are other areas nearby that industrial and office type uses tend to dominate. So this is sort of the we sit back and let the market do its thing scenario. The second scenario is something called value capture, and this is something actually that your planning director, Jocelyn, that she sort of turned us onto, the notion of how do you use assets of a property to leverage value and create better uses. And so we looked at the notion of capturing the value generated by these two distinct differences, the river, open space, and the transit, and how those things interact together. And how do we create some sort of signature transit-oriented type development that really could be that type of welcome, if you will, or I hate to say billboard because it wouldn't look anything like it, but how would it be that welcome mat to Littleton that many residents said, we want something really high quality and really a destination. So, and also if we considered the reverse commute dynamics of Mineral, and look at Mineral as a way to tap into young skilled employees that are upstream from us. So, actually downstream. So some of the opportunities we looked at that could meld these different things, some sort of recreation manufacturer / retailer. So consider something not the scale of an REI that you have in downtown Denver, but something recreationally oriented where you make something and then you test it on the river. Consider someone who would make kayaks, for example, and then test them on the river, or even bicycles, some sort of bicycle thing, and then you have the bike paths if you want to test drive these things. So there's a whole range of recreation, manufacturing, and retailing. Some sort of campus. We thought that particularly the property to the south of Mineral Station would be very attractive to some sort of employment campus. Health and wellness was one idea that popped up. There are not many sites left in Metro Denver, again, with the combination of not just the transit, but the natural amenity. And you'll see when we get into site designs and ideas, regardless of what happens there, there needs to be some care of transition, that between Santa Fe and the river, very different environments. So higher intensity of development on those corridors, much lower, much more sensitive type of development as you move toward the river and toward the open space. And one thought we had was, again, that maybe that's attractive to a large employer that would be looking with some sort of campus type development. And then an outdoor retailer testing amenity. I mean, you've got one just up the road, about a quarter mile, in terms of Breckenridge Brewery. That type of use, which seems to be pretty popular in town and seems to have certainly not hurt the brand of Littleton moving forward. So these sets of ideas, what does that mean? Because I just said let the market do its thing. You're going to end up maybe with a lot of high density housing and big boxes. How do you steer the marketplace to do this? And what would be involved here is some level of intervention. Now, we're not suggesting urban renewal. We know that is not an attractive use, nor is this appropriate use, frankly. This is a marketable site. You don't necessarily need that type of stimulus. But one idea we do have for you, and we do want to discuss, is the notion of special districts. And what special districts allow is they allow a developer or a user to amortize the cost of infrastructure. There's a fair amount of infrastructure that would have to happen here, whether it's streets and utilities, that type of thing. So whether it's a special improvement district or a metropolitan district, these types of special districts, they allow the developer and then the users to amortize the costs of infrastructure over a long period of time. If someone's going to bring you high-density housing or big boxes or that type of use that doesn't necessarily distinguish the site, we don't know that there would be anything that would compel the city to help make that happen through this type of tool. But if we can really try to get something special, we're suggesting through planning, maybe through a special district, which would allow them to amortize infrastructure costs. That's how Littleton could perhaps up the game, if you will, in terms of what happens there. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, JJ Folsom. He's going to walk you through some of the physical constraints and opportunities. We'll wrap this up within the next 8 or 10 minutes, and I think we'll have a lot of time for questions.
Thank you, Brad. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some conceptual ideas that our team has come up with through the public process. So this first diagram here is really just to show you influences on the site. Brad touched a little bit on these. The major influences being the South Platte River here. Also a lot of traffic. There's about 50,000 cars a day on Santa Fe and half that amount, 25,000 cars a day on Mineral. So those are some major site influences. The other ones, the positive, I mean, take it as you will. Some of that's positive, some of it's negative. Other influences are the incredible trail amenities that you have. The city ditch that's running through the property south of Mineral. We have the South Platte River Trail, goes all the way down to downtown Denver, as well as out to Chatfield Reservoir. The Highline Canal Trail, which connects to the rest of the Denver metro area. Some very nice parks and neighborhoods just east of Santa Fe. So those are some of the major influences of this site. One thing that's important to note is that this darker yellow area here, or first let me back up. This outer circle here is a half-mile radius from the light rail station itself, and this inner circle is a quarter-mile radius. These darker yellow blobs in here are the areas that are actually walkable within a half mile to that station. So very important to note, if you live out here, you're a half a mile as the crow flies, but as we all know, the only way to get to this station is by Mineral or the pedestrian bicycle bridge. So you can look at all the residences that are within that half mile as the crow flies that aren't actually within a half-mile walk. And the reason why we use a half mile, that's a typical distance that planners nationally use that most people will walk or to a transit station. So that's just an important note on this site influences. Now we've spent a little bit of time looking at some options, just a couple options, and they're very similar. I'll point out the differences when we get to it. But the important thing to note here is that the area south of Mineral, we're just throwing an idea out there that we've heard support with through the public process of utilizing the city ditch as a unifying feature to that site. So no matter what happens on that property, this is something our team and the public feels strongly about. How can that ditch and those great cottonwood trees be utilized to inform whatever type of development happens there? And in addition to that, making connections from the Dad Clark Gulch to the city ditch, making more connections from these neighborhoods to the station area, making better connections to the Highline Canal Trail. So those are some of the big components of this option. Another thing we heard a lot of is, and we as planners too influence some of these decisions, is that you have 1,200 spaces that are all surface parked right now. You can utilize that land in a lot better way by doing structured parking with some potential development surrounding the parking. So this image down below here is actually a parking structure that's wrapped with office uses and retail uses on the ground floor with several hundred parking spaces in behind. That's an example up in Boulder. Let me go back. So the station itself, these large magenta areas, that's me. I have a loud voice. I probably don't, we're just using this for recording. The large magenta areas are what we're calling the developable pieces of land that's publicly controlled, so the RTD property, if you will. And within that property, you could, if you designed a parking garage that were 3 stories tall and about 1/3, sorry, I have a hard time seeing red, about 1/3 of this property would be taken up by parking structure, leaving to fill for 1,200 cars, leaving the remainder of all this other pink and magenta area open for development. We'll get to that piece a little later, but you can think about how much opportunity exists there. In this option 2, this option actually brought up, looks at the idea of making a second pedestrian bicycle bridge just north of Mineral, which would really make a great connection up to the Jackass Hill neighborhood and also make a direct connection to the Highline Canal, and then ultimately connect down to the South Platte River Trail. So we really like this one. I mean, even what we're doing now is we're actually taking ideas from these different alternatives and melding them into one. And where I think we're leaning towards is as many connections as possible across Santa Fe. So this Dad Clark connection, this connection up here, today you have 1 or 2 right at Mineral. If you can spread those out and get some within a quarter mile of Mineral, you're really going to open up this neighborhood and the opportunity for people on foot and on bikes to get to that station, which will in turn alleviate some of the traffic problems we have now. I mean, we've heard stories of people that live within this half mile of the station, but they're driving because it's a 25-minute walk to get to the station. So the more opportunity to provide, and that's what's really enticing about this city ditch here, providing these great opportunities both at an at-grade crossing, which would be a new intersection, and also at a underpass crossing. So those are really important components of the process we're looking at here. Uh-oh, not good. Oh. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties here. Talk amongst yourselves. The good thing is that I'm old school, so I actually brought boards with all these drawings on there. So if this doesn't fire up, we have old school method. Looks like it might be going here.
You guys work on your Plan B. Our Plan C is to take a brief recess if you feel that that's necessary.
Let's see. It's firing up right here. So
Okay.
let's see what happens. I don't know, like a power surge or something. Plugged in. Could be power.
While you guys are working on that, we are still unable to get Channel 8 to work, but we now have streaming video on the, on our webpage and on YouTube. So, and we're back up.
That's an interesting corridor idea. C470 and E470.
My 8-year-old daughter drew that. Future.
While you guys are setting that up, I just want to make a comment. It's amazing to me that you've got such a good handle on what that area is. The things that you've mentioned and an awareness of the geography and the patterns and the movement and the love for that area, I really want to just comment on. You could have lived here 20 years and been asked, what are the things that are so special about that, and maybe forgotten some things, and you seem to have gotten them all. So thank you very much for that effort. It really makes a difference when we're talking about possibilities.
A lot of that has come about just in the beginning of the process. We spent a fair amount of time doing focus group meetings. We met with a variety of neighborhoods. We interviewed you. We interviewed several council members and planning board members. So that has really helped us, and people that live in the neighborhood. So we made a great effort in that.
That killed 20 seconds, Bruce.
Thank you.
There we go.
Brad, maybe while he's doing that, since our 7th inning stretch is over.
Yeah.
Now, in the parking garage or structure that you were talking about, then isn't that property owned by our RTD?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
What kind of willingness could we expect out of them to?
Well, I think they're willing. The issue's money.
Well, that's willingness is the same.
Yeah, they have land. have no money for this kind of thing, at least not short term. However, RTD is doing joint venture type development. They're doing something in Aurora right now that is not too dissimilar from what we're suggesting here, where they're working on a parking structure. Their bottom line is they just want to replace the parking spaces. So if we can deliver, we as a community, if we can deliver 1,200 spaces, they don't really care how it's configured, as long as the 1,200 spaces are there. So the question is there enough value from what we can create around the structure, both to pay for a structure and also create enough value to generate something worthwhile there?
And RTD's not, are they allowed or not allowed to charge for parking?
There's some funny legislation there.
I'm sorry.
They're allowed, but they can't take the money.
And I need some volunteers.
Well, here's an interesting thought for me, because, and remember, we're going to be working with you folks in downtown in the fall. But the notion of a parking district, and a parking district that is quasi-public, could be controlled by the city. A parking district is fair game. You could create a parking district there that could collect revenue that could partially pay for these things. So there are some mechanisms. RTD, I don't think can take the money, and a private developer, I don't think can take the money, but a public purpose entity, our understanding can.
With the proper structure around it.
Yeah.
So,
And there's actually a big study going on in Aurora right now with RTD that one of our sub-consultants is on that team, so we're learning from them.
I mentioned that because it's a great plan. I'm all with it. But if it's something that isn't likely to happen, then it's time to move on to Plan B.
So we've got a bunch of questions. Let's answer a couple questions while we can, while they're fresh.
Sure.
But then let's
we'll
get you
move on.
back into
Yeah,
your.
We're almost done.
We're almost done here, but yeah.
Go ahead.
My question, I guess, is if we know that it's an inadequate parking spot now, why would we want to recreate the same number if we're going to try and increase the density of the use?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, what I was just alluding to is that if you were just to replace surface parking with structured parking with the existing, that's what it would take. But certainly, you probably want to provide more.
It
You know,
used to be
there's-
25,000 a space. What is it now?
It's for just a very simple parking structure without the wrap, yeah, it's 25, 30,000 a space for a structure. When you start getting more elaborate and, putting development around it,
Well, that's,
that only goes up. And you can't really go down at this site because you stick a shovel in the ground, you're digging up water. So that cost would go way up.
Peggy.
so we had the parking, I mean, I hear what you're saying with that. Why do we think people would necessarily spend money rather than just dash home when they are on light rail?
Spend money on parking?
No, spend money on places in
Oh,
the development.
we've heard a vast majority of community members that Brad talked about it. We want retail uses, so while I'm waiting for the train, I can go get a cup of coffee right across from the station, not, 15-minute walk away over in Aspen Grove. If I want to get off the train and pick up my dry cleaning or drop my kid off at daycare before I hop on the train and go to work, or get a beverage after I get home from the baseball game or on my way to the baseball game, or go grocery shopping. All those kind of neighborhood daily uses that people would rather do before they get in their car and go home.
Okay,
So you're
so
not
then-
making multiple trips.
So collateral question then.
Sure.
Will we also be trying to attract other people who have nothing to do with light rail to go
Sure.
there and
Yeah.
spend a wad?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's not just for people using the rail. It's for
Okay.
the whole neighborhood, all the surrounding
thank you.
neighborhoods. Yeah.
This one is unusual because there's not really any, everyone that I've been around has had developing around it.
Yeah.
This one
It's
is
a
different
unique-
because it's into the line.
Right.
Now, if they were to build out to Lucent, then this would no longer be the end of the line.
Correct.
And we wouldn't have quite the same level of congestion
Right.
in some ways. But I have never seen an RTD or any of the others that don't develop around them very quickly normally.
It's fascinating to us, because when we first got.
Make sure you use the mic because we want to make sure it picks up.
I'm sorry. So what's fascinating to us, when we first got involved in this project, it's a fairly limited geography, and there's only a handful of ownership interests, and we didn't know how many plot lines you really could have. But it's an amazingly complex site with all sorts of different potential outcomes here. So the RTD site, I think, you know, a coffee shop and a laundry is not going to finance a $40 million parking garage. But one reason this is important, I would suggest, you know, to the council and to the planning commission, it's probably not this development cycle. It's probably not the next 5 to 7 years that there's going to be pressure to do something at Mineral. But the next development cycle, I would suggest you really want to be ready and you really want to be prepared. And given what we've seen the last, you know, particularly the last year or two, communities that have done the planning and that are prepared are seeing better quality. And when we haven't done it, you know, we're getting caught off guard. So there's sort of a future aspect to this. The other thing I was going to mention, another player I didn't mention but was integral in our market work, is Aspen Grove. And Aspen Grove, of course, is right to the north of the station, and you would never know it. You know, they never did anything intentional to relate to the station. They're very much plugged into this process, and the Aspen Grove, it has ownership interest in Cleveland, and suddenly they're very interested in how do we start to connect to this? How do we relate to this? So there could be some near-term influences, certainly with Aspen Grove. And I would suggest to you that the importance of the RTDC site itself, that may be more of a long-term play than near-term, but now's the time to think about it and get a vision for it.
I lived in Oregon. The Whole Foods actually is in a park. One of the original Whole Foods is in a parking structure. It's the lower floor of the parking
Right.
structure.
Right.
So, I mean, that is,
There's precedents now where there didn't used to be. In downtown, in the Central Platte Valley, there's a brand-new King Soopers with 4 stories of apartments on it. I used to have to travel to California to take photos of precedents like that. Now we have it in our
Okay,
own
let's
town. So let's wrap
hold
this
off.
up and then
We'll wrap it up and then we'll
reopen.
really ask
So
some questions.
That was a good
Tough
segue on the Aspen Grove, Brad. So this slide here is showing near-term ideas. So these are ideas that can happen no matter what type of development goes on the RTD property or what happens south of Mineral Station. And I alluded to some of these earlier. One of those is creating a safe pedestrian and bicycle crossing at South Platte Parkway where it meets Aspen Grove and connects to the river trail. We've heard loud and clear from the entire community that this is a very difficult road to cross, particularly at peak hours when people are getting on and off the train. It's a speedway. So some ideas of, you know, making a very pedestrian-friendly, bike-friendly crossing of that location, something that should happen regardless of the type of development. Number 2 is, and I talked about it on one of those earlier options, is making this a new bridge, new pedestrian bike bridge north of the existing Mineral Bridge that directly aligns to the Highline Canal Trail and connects the Jackass Hill neighborhood and that connection. And then the third one is a underpass of Santa Fe, you know, similar to the left here. We see them all over the Denver metro area. An underpass at Dad Clark Gulch that connects to this city ditch and then, you know, ultimately making improvements along that city ditch to make, you know, 3 really great connections to that station to allow people to cycle and walk to the station.
palm trees too?
Yeah, palm trees too. Yeah, sorry, that was Santa Monica. I typically try not to use images that don't have the same landscape. It was such a great crossing. It's hard to resist. So we did, as Brad mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, a couple weeks ago, we did a pretty lengthy, non-scientific visual preference survey in that room right there in a public setting, and then that has also been online for the last couple of weeks. So we've had roughly about 80 respondents between those meetings, and we showed about 40 to 50 images, mostly local Denver metro area images of a variety of building types and designs. And this is just a synopsis of what we heard, and Brad talked a little bit about this. There's general support for housing types, a variety of housing types, townhomes, small lot, single-family apartments and condos. But again, keeping those heights down, 3 to 4 stories is kind of what we heard is the max. A lot of support for bike pedestrian connections across Santa Fe and Mineral. I would say if we had to pick number one, that's probably the one we had the most support on. Better connections to the regional trails. People live out here for that quality of life, as we talked about. People use those trails a lot. They're some of the most highly utilized trails in the metro area. Improved bike crossings of the South Platte Parkway, I just talked about that one. Supporting a wrapped mixed-use parking structure. So we showed images of freestanding structures with nothing around it, scored very poorly. People like, yeah, more parking. But then when we showed images of the more wrapped style, so where you have development around the parking structure that hides it, a lot of support for that. Community gardens and urban agriculture. We heard a lot of people are interested in that. You have the great amenity of the river and a lot of this open space, so build upon that. And then Brad talked about this previously, the land use is outdoor oriented, technological companies, some office, campus, small grocery, but again, keeping those heights low. And there was some appetite for, if we are gonna have taller buildings, the 5-story, if you will, that should be up along Santa Fe and Mineral and taper down as you get down to the South Platte. And then keeping a pedestrian scale. So again, no large format or big box retail. And then just a couple more slides here. So the developer summary that we held back in early June, these are some of the key results of that. Again, it was eight or so pretty well-known developers that have done projects in similar locations or at transit stations. Their thought was that the South Platte Parkway should be the defining street in the study area, which makes a lot of sense because right now that's where you have a lot of traffic going in and out to Aspen Grove. Their thought was, why introduce a new north-south street, which is going to just cut up that parcel even more? Let's focus on that street. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get ground floor retail all on that entire street, and nor do you need it, but focus on that street as your primary connector that connects Aspen Grove and then whatever happens to the south there. So we thought that was a great idea. Again, needing bridges and underpasses across Santa Fe and Mineral. They were all over that. More connections. Got to improve that connectivity. They like the idea of the campus format, and especially orienting to outdoor companies. You know, this is why we live here, for the outdoors. And then one of the developers brought up the potential of this value proposition to RTD. He said, you know, I'll build you a 1,400 car parking structure if you sell the rest of the land to me for $1. So that's, you know, that's not uncommon. So you have this public-private joint partnership. He builds the parking and then gets the excess land and puts development on it. So that's something to certainly follow up on. They all agreed it's a great development site. The challenge is trying to find the right opportunity on that site, and that's, as Brad mentioned, we're in this cycle, but there's a lot going on. And right now there's a high demand for housing, low demand for retail, as we've seen Metro-wide putting up apartment buildings all over the place. Their closing thoughts were to make this area more enticing. Is kind of what we're doing now by going through this process. Get the zoning in place, and this is not just the RTD site, this is all the property south of Mineral. Get the zoning in place, create a parking district, make it predictable for the developer, and help expedite that development process. Get all those in place, and you will have more people that'll be interested in these properties.
Zoning is in place currently. What are you talking about? Get zoning in place.
Better zoning.
Better zoning, yeah. More up-to-date zoning, yeah. Your zoning is from 1984 on the site south of Mineral, getting up-to-date mixed-use zoning.
Do you think a developer would be interested at all in rezoning? Judging by little.
Well, this is why what they're saying, they don't want to go through the rezoning. They want the rezoning to be in place, then it's more enticing for them to come to a property. Less time and hassle and money for them.
The city proposes the change.
Correct, exactly, yeah, which is not uncommon. It's just being more proactive, rather than waiting for it to come to you. And then just being open to being different and being patient. You know, that's what a lot takes for good development to happen is being patient. So that wraps up the presentation. Just to briefly go through our next steps. So we're right now, literally starting tomorrow, we're refining concepts. We're going to come up with much more detail on the RTD property. So we'll have building types and footprints on there. We're beginning the draft plan, putting together an outline of what that, I'll get to your question in just a second, getting what that plan will look like. And then we have an advisory group that meets monthly before our public meetings. We're looking at dates right now to have that in probably mid-July. And then on July 26th, we'll have a community meeting where we will unveil the preferred alternatives, if you will. And that'll be at Hudson Gardens, which is really exciting. So an evening meeting, hope you all can make that on the 26th. And then we'll be back here on August 8th to the planning board and our advisory group, a joint study session to look at the draft plan, review the draft plan before we bring it to city council. So we'll get final planning board recommendations September 12th, and then we're back here because you guys have so much going on in September. We're unable to get on that agenda, but we'll be back here on August 4th if all goes smoothly throughout this process to wrap it up. So now I'd like to open up to questions. Brad and I will take them.
Okay, let me try to help host the questions if I could.
Yeah.
Peggy, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is all exciting to me, but somewhere in my mind since I've been on council, I seem to remember there's some major issues with underground water challenges.
Correct. There are a significant amount of infrastructure challenges, particularly south of Mineral. So you're looking at a lot of infrastructure improvements that would be needed for any type of development that happens there. So that's another one of those things that developers brought up is getting the property ready and getting it in place is going to make it a lot easier to not have to go through a citywide vote to do urban renewal, which we're certainly not suggesting.
Doug.
It seems like with 100 or so acres south of Mineral, that's enough land that really doesn't justify parking garages, parking structures very much. And yet, right north of Mineral, you have that small RTD site that's immediately adjacent to Aspen Grove. I'm having a hard time visualizing what would go in there that would justify that kind of expense that doesn't compete with Aspen Grove, when just a little bit to the south, they could build without the cost of a parking structure. I mean, the only thing I can figure is housing, and I'm not sure how housing to get a parking structure actually benefits us, overall in Littleton.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And that's why I made the point earlier, in this development cycle, I would rate that as highly unlikely. However, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years from now, as the whole metro area continues to infill and develop out, these transit sites are going to become increasingly valuable. All the different trends that we track suggest that transit's not going to go away and people are going to rely on it more and more. So I think you're right. I don't see that happening in the short term. We do think, though, long term, that if it probably is a sort of a housing and more neighborhood scale retail that serves that housing and also builds on Aspen Grove. I think also, and don't, of course, we're on camera. I'll say don't quote me on this, but whatever. Being recorded. I think I would not rule out someday, again, not anytime soon, but if nothing happens on that site, and if I'm Aspen Grove, I start looking at that site and it becomes more and more valuable to me. So that may be something that puts pressure on that before even the market does.
Well, it would seem to me that it has to be valuable because of the proximity to the light rail. So it's either office or residential, or it's valuable to Aspen Grove simply for expansion. And outside of those two, I'm having a hard time even in the next development cycle seeing what would go in there. But
Questions? Bill?
If I'm hearing what you're saying on a lot of these uses that are proposed here or talked about, it's similar to the Gateway project in Salt Lake, downtown Salt Lake City, that's just west of their core downtown, except that we also have a river. So they have light rail on one side. It's just off their core downtown, but they have a lot of retail there, and it's mainly, in fact, what, there a couple of months ago on work, and it looks like Main Street at Christmas because they light all their trees. They've got ground floor retail with office and parking above, office, residential, and parking above. Is that, am I saying that right?
Yeah, I think it's, and again, some of these ideas, I'm an economist, so I got to put my market hat on. So sometimes it's hard for me to get too excited. But when we were talking to the residents and we were talking to the citizens, some great ideas really bubbled out. So we talk about the land to the south of Mineral, and we talked about the city ditch. And could that become sort of central, some sort of amenity? And actually, the idea of the night when we had the residents here for the visual preference study came from residents, the notion of some sort of river walk. I mean, imagine that as an amenity. And suddenly the value is being created along the city ditch. It's not dependent on our 50,000 cars on Santa Fe. It's not dependent on our 25,000 cars. And then if we start looking at that, the city ditch, I know, is buried beyond that, but the San Antonio Riverwalk was buried at one point. So you could almost extend that north through the mineral site, even into Aspen Grove. So, I mean, this is what we do when we plan. Sometimes we have to balance, what's practical, what can we really do, but see if we can capture some imagination from the community, try to plant the seed for some exciting ideas. And in a way, because I would agree, I'm skeptical anything's going to happen at the RTD site anytime soon. Capturing those ideas now creates some real value for us moving forward. Fascinating site. Again, we had no idea that this thing was going to have so many layers and intrigue.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just a quick comment because you mentioned San Antonio, but Oklahoma City did the same thing with, they dug up 7th Street and lowered the level by about 15 feet, ran the river through it, and all of a sudden they had Venice. It's just stunning.
Pueblo.
And, we've got a river right there.
The Arkansas River was in a pipe,
Right. And, but these are great. And then they attracted the National Rowing Center to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Give me a break.
Yeah, who would have guessed that?
So,
Oh, that raised another thing. We also, JJ had the opportunity to tour the veterinary clinic there, the horse hospital, which is just fascinating. That is a regional draw. People are bringing their animals from 5, 6 states to that thing. They've invested a lot of money there. They're probably not going anywhere anytime soon. But another fascinating piece of this puzzle, and already, again, a regional draw that is bringing people to Littleton from far and wide.
Can you talk about, you mentioned a special district, and what we also heard from the developer forum was, start changing the zoning, get better zoning there. So does the designation of special district allow for that to happen maybe a little bit more easily, or can you talk a little bit more about how special district would work?
Sure.
And how that affects?
Yeah, let me talk about both, because the zoning, I don't know if we should say better zoning, because that's a little judgmental, but certainly up to date. Up to date zoning, and something that is appropriate to 2016 moving forward, and different development types that we want to encourage as a community. So certainly the type of mixed-use development, the type of campus development that we've talked about, those were not envisioned back in the 1980s. So something that really encourages, one, captures the vision of the community and captures more of a vision that's up to date. So I would say bringing the zoning up to date. The notion of a special district, what that is whether there's 3 or 4 different types of districts. And what the district does is the city council has the authority of whether to form these things or not. But they allow the developer and they allow the development itself to pay off the cost of costly infrastructure over a 30 to 40 year time period. So we probably would not recommend that you create a district anticipating a development, because you want to make sure you get the right development. But we would recommend that in the policy package that's associated with this, that's an option. That's an option, and that the city is willing to work with a development entity to look at a special district to help finance a desirable development for Littleton. So the reason I wouldn't suggest you set it up now is you want to be kind of picky on how you use any sort of incentive. And the special district, it does not cost the city anything. It doesn't. There's some startup costs. They're minimal. But what it does do, it helps the project work because it amortizes, again, the infrastructure costs over a long period of time. So that's something our firm actually does, and we'll lay out some information in the plan that really talks about the different options for the site and provides references to statute and also provides 3 or 4 steps if the city wanted to explore laying the groundwork for that.
Additional questions?
Not a question, but just some comments. Bring up the elephant in the room. The key to this area is Ensor. It always has been, it always will be. We can put in some housing, put in 1,500 space garage, a few retail here and there, but that's not going to create a destination that people want to go to. It's half the battle. It serves RTD and what they want, but blah, yawn. Ensor is the key. What will make this a destination site is Ensor. You'll have a battle on your hands if you're talking about rezoning, upzoning, or improving the zoning, which you corrected.
Updating.
Update, okay, you corrected it, update. I don't know what that quite means. But unless you give them something, they could just say, thank you very much, not interested, I've got my zoning. They could go down to the building department tomorrow and file for a permit. Actually, so could the RTD property. Apparently, it's got the PDC. What are you going to give them? Got to give them what? Either a vision or money or both. So 2 other points I wanted to make was, how do you allow ourselves as a city to be a player in this ball game, to use your baseball analogy? With our history of cutting off our nose to spite our face, straw hats and fishing poles keep Littleton the way it was way back when. We could fight them, and they've got the zoning, we'd lose. How do we free or force ourselves our way to a seat at the table? Again, money and a vision can get us a seat at the table, give them a vision, and by the way, they make a hell of a lot more money if they follow our vision. Mm-hmm. Anyway, those are my comments.
Go ahead, David.
Kind of a comment as well.
Microphone.
I really like the idea of multiple crossings across Santa Fe here, and I think that one of the biggest challenges we have right now in the metro area, apart from driving east-west, there isn't a lot of other ways to get across Santa Fe, no matter where you are. Up on Littleton Boulevard, it's tough getting between the Platte Parkway or Lowell Boulevard and Santa Fe. There's no transit until you get up to 6th Avenue now. There's not, the interstate goes north-south, the Platte River Trail goes north-south, but there's just not a lot of stuff going east-west. So I challenge anybody I talk to increase alternative transportation east and west.
Other comments from the table? Just a comment to what David was saying. The last time we met with Sheridan and Englewood, they're struggling with the same issue of how do you get across Santa Fe, but it's also the railroad tracks. So, right. That they're trying to figure out if they can tunnel under them or, build way over them in order to be able to move from one side to the other. So it's a struggle. Just another comment, and I'm not advocating this, I just am asking it. More parking was there any talk that 1,200 is not enough? If RTD does not expand further south, because they've run through their funding cycle and it's not in the plans now, it's been worked out, but it's not there. More parking, any talk about that?
Well, again, there are forces beyond our control. I mentioned Sterling Ranch and some of these other developments that are going on down the road. Those are going to create more demands on parking. I do think one of the tricky things for planning this site is there ever an opportunity this will not be end of the line? Is there ever an opportunity it would be extended? And I think that's been one of the trickiest things we've had is how do we not close that door, yet still acknowledge there's going to be increasing demand for parking in the short term. Right. So from an RTD standpoint, 1,200 is that magic number. From a market standpoint, which I think several of you have alluded to, you'd probably need more parking there, and certainly over the next, 10, 15 years before any extension to Lucent happens.
Thank you.
I believe that Lucent right now is being pushed from a number of directions, though. And the development of that probably will happen, though, in the next 5 years. There's been a number of meetings regarding it. It's an obvious link.
Well, it's the whole Fast Tracks experience has been unpredictable, and I don't think any of us, after they ran into revenue shortfalls, thought that there would be 90 miles of track at the end of this year. Right? I mean, they've really done a fantastic job looking at innovative partnerships to get that going. So yeah, so that's we don't want to close the door to Lucent happening, which does change the dynamics of the site and the parking demand.
Good. Any other questions or comments? Yes, please.
So, we do talk about other forms of connections, and that just scratches the surface, though, of, it maybe eliminates 1% of the, or replaces the parking spaces, the need for the parking space there. But there was, very, informal hallway discussions around the circular, so I don't, to get people to this site, but not have to park at the site. So there was some talk around that as well. So there are conversations happening, albeit informal at this point, or at least, to my knowledge, informal. The other thing that I wanted to address or comment on, and it goes back to the housing and the 3 to 5 story. We did hear in some public comment on this, and also some, and even myself. We talk about apartments, we talk about condos, but we've never given an opportunity to react to single family. So I think we're missing that input here. I think where people are beginning to say they're getting nervous when it's multi-unit or the higher density, what they're also saying is there an opportunity to see more single family in this big space? Because it's I see some of this as being, that beautiful riverfront property or our beachfront property, which is nothing I can afford, but would love to have.
I think certainly the western edge of the site is a different ballgame than the eastern edge of the site, and would not disagree there be a variety. There's the potential for a variety of building types, particularly as you transition to the river.
Okay, well, I think we're ready to wrap up then. I don't see any other questions. Thank you very much for the update. I'm really looking forward to the next visit and see what other ideas you come up with. This is, I think, very helpful for us. So
Thank you. Thank you for taking so much time tonight, your thoughtful questions, and now I guess you get your real seventh innings stretch, perhaps.
Let's take a 5-minute break.
Generally.
booth there to make sure that we're back live. And again, for people that are stepping in, we know that Channel 8 is not working. We're out on the webpage and out on YouTube, but Channel 8 isn't going to be working for a while, it looks like. Technical difficulty started tonight. So here we are. We'll be back on the agenda. This is agenda item C. This is the B2 Community Business Zone District Amendment. And just to refresh memories, we did an emergency resolution to stop any kinds of activities in the B2 zoning district for a 90-day period, and it was in order for us to study that. The concern that we had as a council was that B2 is all around the city. It's just isolated spots here and there, and then as Jocelyn's going to present, there's also some similarities where it exists in great detail, such as a downtown. So we needed to relook B2. The feeling was that there may be some issues in B2 that just don't really fit what it is that we need to have done in the future of Littleton for zoning. So if we don't look at it, we wouldn't know. So that's what we're doing, and there were no activities going on in any B2 at this point, so it was an opportunity to do it. We've handed out the B2 zone district map, and I'm going to turn it over to Jocelyn to talk about what she has found from her staff study.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And we're excited to start this conversation this evening with both Planning Board and City Council. And we just have one quick editorial comment on the map that was in the packet. They've been revised, so the paper handouts you have in front of you, that we did miss a portion of the B2 zone properties along Littleton Boulevard. I think it was like Elmwood to Hickory. So that has been added in red, and we will make those amendments to everything that's posted online as well. But just to let you know. So we're glad it's still in work session because it's a work in progress. So with that, briefly, we are obviously the moratorium. This is our overview of the points that we want to make tonight. Who we've done outreach to, who we plan to do outreach to on the moratorium, and then the existing regulations, and then some proposed considerations for conversation and discussion tonight, and then outline public process, and then briefly about next steps. I should say the other thing, it's both be myself and Carol Kuhn, our senior planner, tag teaming our presentation. As the mayor just alluded to, the moratorium is for 90 days, and that started on June 14th. Our intent is to send out, or we have sent out, letters to all of the property owners. There's about 250 or so properties that are Zone B2 throughout the city, and so we'll be letting all the property owners know that this is in process.
You said 250?
Yeah, it's approximate. There's probably a little bit more than that, but that's thereabouts. We also have had several folks who had contacted us on an informal basis about potentially doing something on B2 zoning, so we're contacting potential applicants. That's what that bullet point is for. To date, we have had to turn away one application that came in after the moratorium for a B2 property. And the other thing is we'll put all of the information as we move forward on the process on the Littleton Plan site so that everyone can see exactly where we are and what we're doing process-wise. So that's that. And then existing B2 regulations, we can go through those quickly, but we listed some of the uses, the range of personal services, goods and services, and generally, the intent is that it meets that surrounding community. It's not a regional draw. It's more meeting the area that it serves. And you have to have arterial streets and the square footage size of the buildings. There are some minimum lot requirements, open space requirements. There's no maximum height. There is a floor area ratio, and there are. I guess that's the main thing. And some supplemental standards. As you know, you cannot have more than 5 buildings on a lot. There is a requirement about open space and unobstructed open space being evenly distributed along rights of way. And then there is a provision 10.4.12 talking about residential occupancy in non-residential districts for B2. So just a brief overview of now the detail we want to contemplate for considering making amendments. And it is, again, based on what the mayor said, of conversations that we've had in the past and concern and challenges with some of these details in the B2 zone district, and what do we want to consider to make changes to. So design standards, setbacks, open space, building height, percentage of residential and planning board provision, and then a public notice addition. So those are the general topics I'll go over next. And I'm going to turn it over to Carol for the details.
Okay, thank you, Jocelyn. Maybe this is working. If not, it's terrible. As long as I don't move. Okay, I will take it off. We'll be reeling on that. Okay, thank you. So some of the things that came to light with looking at all these maps, we prepared a key map. So if you want, I can pass around the key map. We've kind of divided, the maps are broken down into downtown Littleton, Littleton Boulevard, Broadway North, Broadway South, Santa Fe, and C470, and Bellevue Avenue, and Federal and Bowles. So we looked at, that's the spots all over the city where we have B2. So since, as you look around in all these different areas, you can see that, that maybe the one size fits all for B2 not having any setbacks, not having any building height, perhaps that's not, maybe that one size fits all approach doesn't work. So in looking at it, we're thinking maybe it might be helpful to look at some things like character, scale, and context, and then perhaps dividing up the B2 into maybe a downtown and a Littleton Boulevard, downtown area, a Littleton Boulevard area, and then the remainder of the city, and perhaps tailoring some of these regulations and performance standards in the B2 zone district to be more fitting with those different areas. So some of the options would be some of the things you can do with zoning are your your performance standards. So you can look at setbacks.
Somebody give Doug attention. Never mind.
So you can look at setbacks. You can look at open space. You can look at building height. You can also look at the percentage of residential use, and then you can also relate it back to some of the adopted plans that are already in place. So then, looking at that, if that's something that the council and planning board would like to consider, looking at the downtown, Littleton Boulevard, and remainder of the city, we've kind of taken just a rough path of like maybe how we would get there. So if that's something that you are, a good way to go, then we'll go down that path and discuss the kind of our ideas with the work plan with you, with those different criteria.
And I think one thing to add too is the idea of really still keeping it fairly straightforward and simple for both applicant, community, and everyone involved in reviewing the zoning code. That's a main thing to make sure it's pretty straightforward in those different categories.
So some of the design, I'm sorry, did you want to?
How many of these are developed?
So on your map, there's some purple hatching, the maps that were handed out. The purple hatching is the areas that are undeveloped. So there's about 9 acres or so of undeveloped B2. What we're looking at is a lot of the areas would be redevelopment. So keep that in mind when you're thinking this, like the Woodlawn area and some other areas like redevelopment. So how would you like to see that develop? So some of the basic design standards that you can look at are 4-sided architecture or 360-degree architecture. So we could put together some design standards that would be fitting all across the board, maybe not into these different areas yet, but just some design standards that would work for all B2. Screening of mechanical equipment, so you don't see the mechanical equipment, above the roof line. Screening of the trash containers, providing some buffer to residential and adjacent uses, so you don't have it backing right up to a residential neighborhood. How do you treat that? Because it's a business zone district, so how would you treat that interface between residential and the business and commercial uses that would be in there? And then also relay back to that consistency with the adopted plans that are in place. So one of the pieces that you saw in the B2 zone area was the floor area ratio, and I'll refer to that as FAR. So some of the pieces the reason why you put floor area ratio in place is to get you to some of these performance standards. So it's the ratio of the size of the building to the size of the lot. So you know you have to park it, you know you have to do all, you have to have open space, you have all the other things. So you have this floor area ratio in place. And the reason why B2 has it in there is because they don't have any setbacks and they don't have a maximum building height. So some of the ways we could get some more uniformity and some fitting into these little areas, you know, refining the B2 zone district would be to look at removing the floor area ratio and looking at some of these maximums, a maximum height and maybe some setbacks, and then maybe setting those for downtown, Littleton Boulevard, and the remainder of the city.
Yeah, and I would just offer that I think that's just based on the conversation and direction we've had thus far, that using a setback requirement and a building height really is a way to contemplate more of that character, scale, and context. I think that has been some of the struggle thus far about the current zone district for B2. So that's why that might be a way to contemplate it. And in essence, then you don't need the floor area, but then you really have these setbacks and then a maximum building height.
That gets you more level of assurance, you know, like if you have these setbacks in place, you know what it's gonna look like a little bit more than this floor area ratio. You might not have that comfort. So some of the other things like setbacks. So setback could help you get to that floor area ratio. So some options to consider, like maybe in downtown, you have a 0-foot setback from Main Street and maybe a 10-foot setback from any other area. There's not a lot of B2 if you look at your map in downtown. So we're talking downtown is the football, you know, anything in the football area. There's not a ton of B2. So maybe the 10-foot setback works in that area. And then after the third floor, stepping it back. So if you have the ability to do a third floor, it has to be set back from the street. You know, some options to consider. For everything along Main Street, doing a 0-foot setback, but then you can allow for a provision if you have like outdoor dining plazas, pedestrian plazas, cafes, street trees, you could then allow for that a reduction in that 0 setback. So they could go back 5 or 10 feet to get that pedestrian activity in there. That's one option with downtown, a couple ideas to think about. Then with Littleton Boulevard, so what do you want to see? Like, let's say Woodlawn redevelops in the future. A 20-foot setback would probably work there. You'd want a 10-foot parking setback, maybe. You know, you don't want the parking right up against there. You want that nice boulevard look. And then you perhaps might want to do the third floor stair step back to also give that appearance of a bigger setback, but still allowing buildings to go up to 20 feet from the right of way, and then stepping back that third floor so that you don't get this tunnel of buildings along Littleton Boulevard. Then for the remainder of the city, kind of mirroring the same setbacks. You know, Littleton might not be, like even with Mineral Station, might not be your 5-story, 10-story, you know, business district. So maybe there's that component where you still want your setbacks, you want your 10 feet, and you still want that third floor step back so that you have that appearance of a larger setback. So looking at some building height options in downtown, maybe a 40-foot maximum building height with a maximum of 3 stories.
Which is also in line with the CA zone district, and realizing that those are the 2 districts you're dealing with your downtown. So that was where that came from.
And then perhaps maybe looking at stepping back the buildings again, giving that appearance of a larger setback and making it not look so tall. Maybe along Littleton Boulevard, it might be appropriate to have 60 feet. Now, in the Littleton Boulevard plan, it talks about nothing being higher than the courthouse, 81 feet. Is 81 feet what you would like to see all the way along Littleton Boulevard, say it redevelops and somebody assembles lots? You know, is that what you want to see up to 81 feet? Perhaps 60 feet might be a good place to start. Also stepping back the buildings at after the third floor so it doesn't give that tunnel effect still. And keeping in mind you would have the setbacks and some other things, no parking in the front, that would give you that green lawn appearance, you know, the boulevard look all the way down Littleton Boulevard. And then for the remainder of the city, perhaps 75 feet would work. But if it's adjacent to residential, 75 feet might not work. You might want to take it down another story. So maybe it's something like 60 feet if it's adjacent to the residential and stepping back after the third floor as well. So because we have some hotels that are going in and down in off of County Line Road and 470, there's some hotels, and that's on the Santa Fe and 470 piece down there on that map I'm pointing behind. Councilmember Hopping, I'm not pointing at you, I'm pointing behind you. So that's a piece of B2, and they are 4 stories in height. So some of those are 60 feet. So, you know, want to pass that one around too? So then unobstructed open space. We have that provision in the performance standards, in the supplemental standards in the code that talks about having the evenly distributed open space along the right-of-way. So maybe there's a way to get to that in another way. So having a 10% for downtown, which would also mirror that CA zone district, because 20% of open space in that downtown area is a bit hefty for people to try to have to get to that 20% in some of these smaller lots in that infill. And it looks a little dissimilar from the CA. So you can tell just by looking at how much open space it has that it might not blend. And then maybe some of the plazas and outdoor eating areas could contribute to that open space. So you're giving them that provision for that additional setback, but maybe you're encouraging the walkability, the pedestrian feel, all of that by allowing that 10% to be met through those pedestrian plazas, street trees, and other things. Then for Littleton Boulevard, perhaps it goes back to the 20% that it is now. State remains the same. You have a 20-foot landscape buffer, though. That gets you to that evenly distributed open space. So you have a 20-foot landscape buffer that's landscaped according to, you know, some sort of classification. Maybe it's a certain number of trees or a certain number of shrubs along that to give you that tree-lined look. And the remainder of the city, perhaps it's the same thing. You want it to have that tree-lined look. You want Littleton to have that small town feel, even though you might have some taller buildings in it in the B2.
My concern with Littleton Boulevard is that a number, there's already things that are pretty much buried behind some of the larger buildings now. You know, and I guess you're not talking about the entire Littleton Boulevard at this point. You're
Just
only
the
talking
B2.
at the little bit of B2 that's on it.
Just the B2. We're only
Okay.
talking about the B2, not all of Littleton Boulevard.
Okay.
Half of it.
There's some T and there's some B1 and there's some other zone districts out there along Littleton Boulevard. So then there's also, it came up in some recent projects, you know, how much residential is appropriate in B2? Maybe it's not.
What's T again? I'm sorry.
Pardon me? Transitional, yes, sorry. And CA is central area.
Thank you.
So in the downtown, perhaps it's 30% residential. Maybe you don't want any more than 30%. And maybe you don't want it on the ground floor. Maybe 30% residential is enough and it has to be on the second floor or higher. You know, because that's your pedestrian walkability in downtown. You want the retail, you want the shoppers, you want, you know, the window shopping and the cafes and stuff. You don't really want that taking up, you know, residential on the ground floor. So then along Littleton Boulevard, perhaps there's a 50%, which is what it is now, up to 50% residential could be in the B2. But along Littleton Boulevard, it wouldn't be on the ground floor. So still you're getting the shopping, the walkability, the retail piece. And then in the remainder of the city, perhaps it's the 50% again, but along the arterials, no ground floor residential. So still you want people to be able to shop and walk and get to that. And then maybe you have that vertically mixed use piece where you have some sort of residential up above.
Or as you get beyond either Littleton Boulevard or an arterial, you can go interior to the lot, and there is behind that main arterial street, there might be able to have residential on the ground floor, but it's just not on the front face, if you will.
So then, is to allow for some sort of public process, what would be some thresholds where it could change the character and the nature of the surrounding area? So perhaps it's residential use. If you're in B2, maybe it's supposed to be business, and the piece that could change it is if there's any sort of residential use. So maybe there's a provision to allow you to go to, you know, to require it to go to planning board for approval, so that it would be similarly processed to a PDO. The PDOs go to planning board. This would have planning board approval. So then there's the public process. So what could be a thing that could change the character and the context and the surrounding piece? And then some other thresholds that could be considered. So residential use could be one if you meet any of these three on a 5,000 square foot lot. If it's bigger than a 5,000 square foot lot in downtown, that could make a big difference on character and in your context in downtown, because there's a lot of little tiny lots down there, and if you had a 5,000 square foot lot, it could change the character. Also, a 10,000 square foot building could significantly change the character downtown. Along Littleton Boulevard, it's a little less impactful on the smaller pieces, so maybe you look at any residential use again would be required to go to planning board for a public process, be reviewed, and approved by planning board, and it would be maybe on a half-acre lot. So any one of these three thresholds, again, residential use, half-acre lot, or a 25,000 square foot building. Then for the remainder of the city, again, keeping with that, we want to protect the B2. Maybe any request for a residential use would change the context of what we want in our business district. And then on a 1.5 acre lot, and then a 40,000 square foot building would require planning board review.
So just trying to find that threshold between administrative versus needing to come to a planning board for a bigger conversation about those elements of character, context, and the scale.
And then I think this goes back to Jocelyn, and we had some other thoughts, so turn it
Yeah,
over to Jocelyn.
so the other thing, and this is maybe expanding it a little bit, but in thinking about communication and notification to the community, we would like to propose that for any project in any zone district in Littleton, if it requires a public hearing, that we have an additional requirement of written public notice to the community. So we have three options listed on the slide here. And what requires a public hearing, as Carol was mentioning, the PDOs, GPDP, conditional use, and then rezonings. Those all right now require review and or approval by planning board and city council on some level. So then some options to consider if that's a direction we'd like to head would be at a minimum, you notice the abutting property owners, so all of the properties that surround the project site you're talking about, or maybe there's a radius within 300 feet of that property or 500 feet that the applicant would be required to provide that notice, and we have it written in the code that they give us an affidavit and, you know, show us all the folks and how they came up with their noticing and where they sent it to. But that's an option to contemplate, again, just providing additional outreach on development projects in the city. Right now, people can go to the website and it's on PAL, and projects that do come before planning board and council, they are required to post the site with a pretty big sizable sign. So we have some right now. It's just contemplating adding some more to that.
I have to admit, I'm kind of surprised that we don't notice the neighbors at this point, because that's a standard in planning normally. The standard is actually 250 feet of owners around the property.
I've done it, 250, 300, I think, in that general.
In this dense area is probably more than enough. And it should be done 2 weeks before there's ever a meeting.
Correct, it would have to give some time frame ahead of it.
Like I said, I'm just amazed that we don't do that already. I mean, I looked at the sign for the Clayton property, and if you didn't know that there was a sign there, you wouldn't have known there was a sign.
Correct.
So no,
So this would apply beyond just the B2. This would be for all applications that would be the PDOs, GPDPs, conditional uses, because we've heard the concerns, and so maybe this is a way to address some of them. So while we're doing it, might as well fix some of the other things.
This to me, and talking with staff and Carol, we feel that this is really a big component that could provide some additional outreach and another level of letting everyone know and transparency and really just putting it out there as much as possible. And then here is our beautiful slide on timeline. And we came up with a timeline within the 90 days. So obviously tonight is kicking this whole conversation off. Once we get your feedback and direction from this evening, we'd like to progress pretty quickly to some open houses. We would propose to have 2 on 2 different nights. It would be the same material presented, which would be a draft of the updates that we're proposing to get community feedback. We would do our noticing to property owners, to, put it out on social media and really promote. We want all participation, as well as we would have some stuff on the website too for people to participate that way. And then gather all of that data from those 2 open houses and the website, and then come back and reconvene in a joint study session with you in July to contemplate those proposed changes. The one thing we did put in here at this joint study session is we really would review and see where we're at relative to moving forward. And if at that point, planning board and council said, you know what, wait a minute, based on feedback we're getting, we think we need some more time, this does allow for us to extend that moratorium. But assuming that we're good to go and everyone's feeling pretty confident and really like the direction we're moving, then planning board hearing on the 25th, and then first reading city council in August, and then second reading in early September, which does get us within that 90-day window.
You pointed out where the properties are. Do some of these properties have multiple owners?
We've sent it to all.
No,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, or do you have, or do some of these are very tiny. So do you have like 2 different owners on some of these small ones?
Potentially. I mean, we just sent it out to property owners. We didn't do a lot of analysis at the moment on the ownership.
Will they have an option of coming to the?
Yes.
We hope so.
No, the option of coming to the associate zoning next to them if they wanted a zone change.
Oh, pretty much if you fit within the categories, anything can be rezoned as long as you meet the criteria
But
to the
intent-
adjacent.
The thought is not to rezone anybody's property.
Yeah, we're not proposing that.
So what other questions do we have?
So, that's where we're at. If you have more questions.
Go ahead.
I have a question. If we're not rezoning any of the properties, what is the actual change that we're making? Aren't you creating really 3 new zoning districts?
No,
Like
what
a
we're saying.
B2, 3, and 4?
No, we're saying within the B2, so that map that is right there.
Yes.
So everything still is zoned B2, but if you're in those areas, you may have some specific criteria that's a little bit different. So I think some of the feedback has been, this one size all doesn't really fit. And so this is a way, so you have B2 as your overall zoning, and there are some requirements that are across the board apply to everyone. And then if you're in downtown, okay, well then your setback is this, your height is this. But if you're on Littleton Boulevard, your setback is this, your height is X.
So you have to know, you would have to define for each of those, you have a B2 zoning, and then there's B2 Zone A that's bordered by this,
Correct.
this, and this.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it just be easier to create like a B2A, B2B, B2C or something, or create new zoning districts, just so that everyone's very clear on?
There would be a sub-district, basically.
It would be designed, so we'd have some general standards for everything, and then we would discuss why we would have it broken down into 3 areas, and the intent, the character, the context, and then we would say, if you're in this area and have a map, you would have to be, you would be subject to these performance standards. If you were in this area, you would be subject to these performance.
I guess the other thing to think about it basically, those seem to be the 3 big ones, and they all have different adopted comprehensive corridor plans or neighborhood plans. So just really looking at those seem to be the 3 kind of character areas.
Here you've got 5 areas outlined, and some of them overlap. So some,
It's just for the map.
Because the map, Littleton Boulevard was long enough and fine, but then we just kind of broke down the other ones because we couldn't get them all on one map. You wouldn't be able to see. We wanted to make sure the aerial came through so you could kind of see the interplay. So those
so
aren't-
those just correspond to that?
Yeah, we're just talking
Yeah.
about 3 areas, downtown, Littleton Boulevard, and then the balance of the city.
Okay, but
These are
the
just to highlight
boundaries
the-
need to be very, very clear,
Yes.
obviously.
Yeah.
So you're B2, but you're in
Correct.
B2 Littleton Boulevard, which some of it goes into downtown, so.
Yes, you're right. You would have to define that on a map. Just if you like that concept.
We're kind of wanting to get some feedback from everyone. Do you like the idea of 3 areas? Does it make sense? Do you like some of the things you've heard? We have this tight time frame, so kind of want some feedback. so we can meet our moratorium. Is that what everybody was kind of thinking? We were listening to what all the comments were, trying to gather them all together.
A couple of points. We have existing design guidelines in some areas. Littleton Boulevard has them. Main Street has them for buildings that aren't in the historic, haven't opted into the historic district. Is there any thought to just applying those existing design guidelines that have already gone through Planning Commission, and I believe Council, instead of developing new ones?
I wouldn't say that they're new, and current, and the code still would require that you're compatible with those adopted comprehensive plans, corridor plans. We're talking about more site planning, site design things of a setback, the height. I mean, those are things in addition to, you still would have to meet the design guidelines, be compatible with those. Those don't go away. And I agree that might be a future step that we want to incorporate once we have all of those comp plans updated and whatnot, maybe you do want to incorporate some elements as requirements. This is a first stab at creating just some site design parameters.
Each zone district has performance standards for it. You know, you have your minimums and maximums.
Right, and a lot of the design guidelines actually have those in them, on height and setbacks. And those other ones, I know that as we went through those before. But I just suggest that you take a look at those.
Well, that's why we came up with some of these. They didn't just materialize out of,
Oh, yeah, no, I didn't.
our back room somewhere. We actually
No, I didn't think so.
It's important to have that.
That's why we
context,
wanted
though.
to link, right, we wanted to link them forward, link them to that, but there's some pieces that, if you had to, there's no design standards for like down off of county line, there's nothing.
Right.
So have some general things, we want 360-degree architecture, we want trash enclosure screen, mechanical equipment screen, some general things, and then that's why we'd reference back for the ones that do have some sort of design criteria and stuff in the adopted plans, we'd reference back to that, just that way it solidifies it.
A couple other points. On Main Street, we've seen a proliferation of office space on the ground floor. Any consideration if this is the right place to go retail only on the ground floor?
We had thought about that, so that's kind of what we wanted to hear from you. Is it appropriate to have office on the ground floor in Main Street? Is that, we've heard from Don Elliott, the consultant who's working with us on the use table, and that if it's just, if you're just reserving your B2 just for retail, and then stuff sits empty, is that worse for your downtown area than having an office in there? So it's kind of that balance. What do you want? Do you want a vibrant downtown, and if there's some office, okay? It's kind of up to you. So is that something, that's something to talk about?
And do you want input on that? I have two other questions. Okay. Talk about it.
Well, and certainly,
The argument on retail only is that it is the core center. And if you have retail office, it diminishes the retail experience. So is downtowns, and if you look at examples like Larimer Square, it's all retail down, and that helps create that vibrancy. 16th Street Mall, despite the current condition of it, it's all retail. I think, what's the name of the street in Colorado Springs? I'm losing the name of it, but a great majority of dedicated retail areas are retail only down because you don't have that breakup of that experience. So I'd like to propose that we take a look at that, maybe,
What's the problem of having an architect's office on Main Street and one of the small storefronts, delightful pictures, really exciting things going on inside? Why does it all have to be retail? Why does the city have to dictate exactly what's going to be in their downtown? Let the market have some say in it. Why not have a variety?
Well, and Mark, that's the question. But I look at places, we go down, and no offense to my landlord, but Lavaca is, it's a stock brokerage in there. And that creates absolutely no traffic, and it's not very interesting, and it's prime retail space.
Stockbrokers are kind of sexy, but...
Well, it depends, they're cows, but I guess it looks good to another cow. But anyway, that's the discussion. I'd just like to hear what other people have to think about that.
Other comments?
I agree that we should at least have a strong preferential or preference for retail. But if space sits empty, then, you know, it's better to have it full than not, so.
Those offices generate users of downtown.
Well, especially if it's an insurance company or some type of office that would generate traffic, at least to some extent. But it is much better to, in my opinion at least, to have kind of that eye candy, window shopping as you're walking down Main Street, to be able to, you know, see something interesting rather than just see a desk inside a window.
And that are open during retail hours. Office
that's true,
hours
too.
are closed on weekends and typically closed in the evenings, and that creates a dead, dark feeling downtown Main Street.
Bruce?
Well, I guess the Main Street question, I actually had a couple other questions. Do you want to just?
No, go ahead.
Fair game?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, the Main Street question, I guess, I don't have any problem with the flexibility side of it, but I mean, I think the answer to your question is it's, you know, retail sales tax is a driver of services, which is why presumably there was always, and always has been, the conversation about retail on Main Street to try to generate incremental sales tax revenue. But I had three sort of inquiries or questions, I guess. If the zoning codes that are lined out on the map and in the regulations were all presumably sort of integrated and they were step functions, and I get the one size fits all. But they were originally designed to integrate. I guess if you're going to do this with B2, you know, why wouldn't you do it with B1, B3, CA, whatever? I mean, why just B2?
That's
Well,
what we were hoping
so,
you would come to.
yeah, so it's a great question. Can we kind of just talk about right now? So under future steps, you see other zone districts. So I do want to actually ask that. Does anyone have any comments more specifically to B2? And then we can get to that, because I think that is another question we have for direction.
Well, okay, so I had a couple other questions. If you're going to go there, that's great. I've heard a phrase, and Mark, you can probably, and Bill, maybe you can too, called form-based zoning, and I wonder if, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound, is that sort of what you're doing here? That if you're almost going to stipulate design guidelines as part of the zoning code, are you, and do you want to, or is that the intent, to sort of maybe move in a direction of form-based zoning as opposed to one size fits all? But I say that out of ignorance because I honestly don't know specifically what form-based zoning entails. I just have heard the phrase over the years.
The specific answer to what we're proposing was no, it wasn't to change to form-based zoning. It was just to provide some site context within our existing zoning that would still, the uses are still the uses. We're not proposing to eliminate those.
Okay.
Generally with form-based, then you are getting rid of the use because it's really, you just want the form to match what the desired intent. And certainly we can contemplate that if that's something that everyone wants to. That may be a future conversation. I'm not sure within 90 days that that's a doable type of conversation.
Yeah, probably so.
Collins is form-based.
Yeah, okay.
So
Like
Denver,
I said,
right,
I've heard it. I don't know really what it means, but it just,
There's no particular use, it's just how well you fit in the neighborhood.
well, but that's sort of what we're contemplating with this in some respects.
It's a tiptoe step.
Yeah.
It's a
Toe in the
it's
water.
not a-
All right, the last question I had was I guess I'm not quite sure I understand, when you guys were talking about the public hearing piece of it, if I understand where you're going, I mean, you've got all of the design guidelines for, to your point, Brian, you know, B2A, B2B, whatever, even though they're not really separate zones. So theoretically, somebody comes in and says, I own property in a B2 district and it's on Littleton Boulevard and I meet all the criteria you've set out as far as setbacks, building height, and so forth and so on. So I have a use by right project. And then one further criteria is if it has such and such of an impact, you're going to open it up to a public hearing if somebody wants to do a use by right project on their property in a zone that meets the criteria. I don't understand how you can call a public hearing on somebody if they're doing a use by right project
I think that
as we've designed it.
how the concept would be, and it doesn't have to be this way, this is just for conversation, would be that we're saying if it meets these, then potentially the scale and the character and the context is greater.
Then it's a rezone, isn't it? Because you've already laid out what
it's still zone B2, it's just that review and approval steps it up a notch to the planning board to make that decision.
I'm having some heartburn with it, but I don't know that I fully understand it, because if it's use by right and you've narrowed the uses to what you've defined in various areas, you can still force somebody to a public hearing if they want to do something on their property that corresponds to the uses you've set out. That doesn't sound right.
It still has to be compatible with the comp plan and all of those things. So there still are some subjective provisions that you all would have to look at to use by right today, has to meet all of those other elements as well, so.
There's some approval criteria that we go through. It's in 10.7.3 for an administrative site plan.
That part I understand that part.
So that would be what you would be looking at. So some of the things that we look at are architecture and colors, mitigation of adverse effects, so location of the buildings, vehicular ingress and egress, things that could impact the neighborhood.
But those are,
Design elements.
Yeah.
So you're looking at the design elements is what we're.
but you want to turn that into a public hearing?
In some jurisdictions, it is a public hearing.
Right, if it's a bigger
Wow, okay.
project in an existing zone district.
Okay, let's move on around for some other questions. Bruce, that was it? You got?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. And we got to make sure some people who haven't spoken yet get their opportunity. Go ahead.
So I was shaking my head to a lot of the comments you made, so I'm going to say I also had the same comment on B1, B2, B3. And then also so in your staff report, it talks about PDOs as well. So I'm assuming this is PDOs that are commercial only. I want to be very clear of what is in scope, and in the staff communication, it listed several things there. It said B2, plan development overlays, conditional use, site development plans, and subdivisions.
That's what's under the moratorium. Moratorium covers those pieces.
So any application that's submitted for anything relative to in the B2 zone district.
So if you did a subdivision in B2, you wouldn't be able to do it until the moratorium was over.
Okay. And if you want to do a PDO
Correct.
in B2,
You can't submit the application now, you have to wait until we've got the new standards.
Okay.
Assuming we create new standards in place.
Okay. The other comment is, so I'll come back to, I think, what both Bill and I think even Bruce were alluding to, and what I would like us to be using more of is what is that we're trying to achieve? So you said it. You said the more of the boulevard field or more of a downtown pedestrian area. So I think that absolutely needs to come forward first. And in essence, that's our comp plan or our corridor plans or our neighborhood plans or our design standards or things that we should have. And that should be our starting point. If we begin to change this without having that as the background that has gone through the process, then I think we have to be very transparent and upfront even to ourselves to say, we have nothing to go by at this point, but we feel that this needs to be addressed. So I think we just need to have that visibility and understanding of it is coming and based on a process that was already in place, that went through the right different
Right,
steps.
because we have the corridor
Perfect.
study.
So
We have-
I think that's important that we bring forward and acknowledge that that's how we're bringing forward these recommendations. Then regarding, so with that, it really is, what are we trying to achieve in these different areas where B2 or B1 or pre-exists, and then here's why this will help solve for that. I also this begins to feel a little bit like what the intent of form-based code is, which is more about how it looks and fits the character more so than the use of the property. I know for our purposes here, we're not wanting to change zoning, so that's why we're modifying some elements of zoning that help us to bring it closer to addressing character in any given neighborhood. Last comment is on process. So the intent of getting it to planning board or yeah. So the process of opening it up to a public session, I also am unsure. So if it came to us, and really what we're deciding on is it within, does it meet the criteria of the zone? If it does, it does. So I'm not sure what the role of planning board necessarily would be there.
It would be, as we just said, it's not all as black and white. There are some elements about character and architecture and impacts to the neighborhood. So if you like the idea, it would be if it meets a level that maybe is bigger in scale, in nature, in context, that those have to come to the planning board for review and approval of the same criteria. You're right. If it was, all it was black and white, building height, setbacks, and uses, then
today,
yeah,
if there's
then
no
that-
change in, so if they're building within current zone, they're within zoning, and there is some change to the design elements of it that a developer is proposing, is that right now approved administratively only? That
If I
those things
understand
that
what
are
you're saying.
subjective, those things that
Yes.
are subjective in nature.
The 10.7.3 list that Carol just alluded to, yes, there is some subjective interpretations.
And so that, because of concerns that were raised about the administrative process, there's some thresholds that maybe you want to hit if it could change the character. And that's what we were proposing with that planning board piece. Perhaps that's not what you want. I mean, perhaps you want it all to ratchet down some of these design pieces and some performance standards, and then there's that comfort level. That's the conversation. Maybe we don't need the planning board decision, but when it's being done administratively, there's no public process. So is there a point where the public should weigh in if it changes the character, if it's next to residential, or if they're proposing residential in a business zone district? I mean, we heard concerns about office. Well, maybe it's not appropriate to have residential in there unless you look at the character and then how it's treated and how the building faces the adjacent residential. There's pieces, design elements that could be reviewed by the planning board.
But just for the record, I will say, in my opinion, if there are elements that are truly subject to interpretation, something of a greater scale or a greater impact, then I do think it needs additional more eyes and more people and more review to establish that subject to interpretation.
Okay, let's get some comments from some folks who have not had the chance yet. Kurt?
I have a question. So if I own a piece of B2 property, B2 property along Littleton Boulevard, and I have B2 zoning, I understand adding some design standards and guidelines, but if you're changing my floor area ratio and my setbacks and my height limits and my open space, are you not rezoning that property?
No, you're not, because you're making those changes to the entire B2 zone district. So every property in the district would also have those changes. So.
But you're saying you're going to make changes in different
But we're just saying that
districts
they
over
would just
here.
have different categories. Yeah.
So you're.
But it's not just for one property. It's for all the properties within those sub areas.
I thought I just heard that you're going to make some downtown different than Littleton Boulevard.
Right,
than
in those sub, but they'd be
okay.
sub-districts. So everything in the downtown
But
area
right
as
now,
we
I have a
define.
B2 zoning, I can build anything. As
Well,
long as
right
it meets that.
now, you have the current code that is
Right.
under moratorium, because I believe the big comment to the reason why we're having that moratorium is how do these elements all fit together? And staff is trying to look into that and say, you know what, it does appear that a one-size-all isn't really working. So what are some other elements that we could
But you're
contemplate?
changing what I can do on my property if you do that.
Well,
Not what, but how.
I think it's
So
how.
The land use the land use wouldn't change, but
But the size of
how.
it,
The size of
size,
it, which may impede
setbacks,
what you can do.
what I can build. You're changing what I can build on that property.
Potentially the design of how it lays out, yeah. Not that you can't build it, it's just going to potentially be different because the rules may.
You just lose a couple.
It's part of your right.
Okay,
Oh, I love it.
okay, additional questions. Kurt, do you have any others? No, thank you. Okay, let's move
I
on.
just have one question. I think it's very confusing to have the 3 zones under one name, the 3 subzones. I do like the idea of B2A, B2B, B2C, because it makes it very clear. You're not just picking one and deciding that's for yours.
Yeah, I mean, how,
That's a personal opinion, because it'll get
that's-
very confusing when
There's,
somebody
it's
calls.
one way or the other. I mean, how we do it, the semantics of it, it's still the same concept.
Other questions? Go ahead.
For downtown, I'm not looking to make downtown into a shopping district. I'm looking to make downtown into a downtown, which is exactly what it is. I don't know why we would restrict every storefront and every ground floor to just retail. Telluride has a historic district. It's a very desirable place. There's offices on the first floor all up and down Colorado Boulevard, which is Telluride's Main Street. We currently have printers, a car repair place. We have a whole building, the Stewart Building, which is basically offices. And yet everybody agrees that downtown is a desirable place. So I'm not looking to transform downtown into every building, every storefront being retail. My preference on B2 would be 2 changes: take residential out and set a height of 35 feet. And if we want to transform, or the property owner wants to transform what's essentially a business district into a residential district, then they should go through a rezone, rather than what we had happen with the Grove. 35 feet probably gets and matches the building heights downtown. If somebody wants to build higher than 35 feet, then I think that should go through a rezone. And I'm disturbed by this process of doing a dance around everything we can do to keep from doing a rezone, but to try and get some of the benefits of it. That's my preference.
Other questions? Mark?
We are flailing all over the place here. Nobody has the slightest idea what the consequences are. This is like 10 years of APA magazine articles as to what to do with zoning. You talk about one size fits all in the B2. You mentioned, what about R1, T, I, CA, B1, R3? We still have one size fits all. Why are we picking on B2? Because we had a brouhaha about the Grove, knee-jerk reaction. Now we put a 90-day moratorium on B2. An earnest B2 owner now, one of them came in. Maybe he wants to add a paint booth to his car dealership. He can't do it because there's a moratorium. The moratorium could be extended. Seems like we're just cherry picking here, just the latest APA craze here. I think we need to step back, get rid of this moratorium, take a sober look at the entire, if you want to, it'd be a 2-4-year process, take a look at the entire code. I could see just minor adjustments. I don't like redoing the whole code. We don't have to. It's a simple code. It'd be nice to keep it simple. You mentioned a couple of things. I agree with one of them, maybe not the other one. We can argue about the height limit.
I don't know what the right height is.
Yeah.
But I think we ought to pick something that's not unlimited.
But this is some serious stuff we're talking about, and I deal with it every day. And I'm shaking my head here, and we've got these meetings coming up, and no time to really analyze anything. This is, quite frankly, nuts.
I agree.
You are creating new zones. That's regardless of anything else, it is a new zone. You can tweak it, you can call it whatever you want, you can call it the same thing. What you have is right now a blank slate that needs to have criteria to it, and it doesn't. That's what you've got.
We're trying to
Then
add
call it what
criteria.
it is. it's a new zone, because that's what it
That's
is.
why we're having
That's
the
why we're here.
conversation, and that we were given direction to come up with a work plan and to figure out a way to fix this problem. And that's what we were given and we were tasked with.
Okay,
We
let's,
have put together a schedule to meet this.
let's get the conversation back on track, because that's what we're here to do, is discuss the issue as a group. Doug?
We met with the Planning Commission for breakfast, a couple months ago. We set the priorities for the Planning Commission. I thought we all had agreement, and our priorities were to get the various area plans done. I think it would be a mistake to jump into the middle of massive zoning code changes or even mediocre zoning code changes. I am concerned about something like Columbine Square that's completely zoned B2 and getting another business-zoned project that turns into residential through the same process that the Grove has. But what we don't know is what are the current heights of the existing B2. I think you said that the hotel is going to be 40 feet down on.
Well, the hotels are 70,
65 to
six.
70 feet. So by
Six.
limiting it to 35, we'd be creating.
The ones to the
Nonconformance.
south, the ones
Yeah,
down south.
so I think what we need to do is find out what the heights are. If that's one of the two criteria we're going to put in, I think we absolutely have to take residential out. But we don't even know how many places are using residential in B2. The story I heard, or that I think we all heard, was it was created so that downtown business owners could live over their places, looking at what's zone B2 downtown. I don't know if there's any of them that are any B2 downtown that's living over their business, and I can't imagine the car dealers living over the paint shop or anything else like that. So I think that the thing that my number one priority is to take residential out of B2 and is it B1 or B3 that it's also in? And I
It's
think
B1.
I think we need to set a reasonable height, and I don't know what that is. I picked 35 feet because I thought that was reasonable for downtown. And then look at doing zoning changes after the Planning Commission gets done with what we actually prioritized them to do a month or two ago.
Okay, we're going around. We're just about done with the time. Anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak? Bill?
I just, on some of these points, and I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying there, Doug, but there is a cost to that. Kurt alluded to it earlier. But if you take away the ability of somebody, the hotels are a great example. It takes 60 feet to put in a 120-room hotel. If you limit that to 80 rooms, you've diminished that land value by 30%, and you're going to have to buy that. So where are you going to get the money? So we need to think about those
On the
things.
other hand, you look at a B2, the size of Woodlawn, would you really want a 60-foot building going in there?
Or
Hotel?
maybe,
No, that's-
or maybe,
that's
or
what
maybe,
we're talking about.
maybe that's
You can't do it.
the,
It's
maybe
got a
that's
2-to-1
the,
floor area ratio, parking requirements.
Yeah.
You can't pull it off.
but you can get it taller than you think.
Okay, any
Well, you
other-
can get to
Maybe
6
it's,
stories.
maybe it's looking at heights
Any
in
other
those three
comments,
areas.
folks? Let's get some structured comments here, okay? Bill, had you finished?
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments, anybody who's not spoken yet? Peggy?
Just a minor one, because a lot of great points have been raised. When I go to downtown Littleton, I go to the bank, and when I go to the bank, usually I go to a restaurant. My husband goes shopping along with going to the bank and the restaurant. And that's on the street level. We don't, well, or if we go and eat upstairs in a restaurant, outdoor, whatever. But it's the variety down there that appeals to me on the street level. So to say, to think that maybe everything on the street level ought to be the same kind of thing, to me is counterproductive.
Suggestion. So what we're trying to do here is to give staff direction on what do you want them to do. They have 90 days to do something. And I think there's been a lot of discussion tonight about, is it truly changing the zoning or not? And there are some technicalities of how we can say it is not, but it may be, there were also some points that say, maybe technically we're not, but kind of feels
The
like.
idea is we're changing provisions in the code, yes.
But we're not changing the zoning. It's not, it still will be a B2. So so something that I think we can, and I think we can all agree on is, well, let's start with the easy stuff, the process. So as you said, there is some portion of this review process that is subject to interpretation. So that's one thing that I believe everyone would agree that there is a need for a new process to allow for definitely greater notification and visibility of a development that is coming in any given area, as you recommended. Two, that for there may be certain criteria, meaning how big the size is or what the development is, that would change the process from what it is today to the future. So I think those are two things that are non-contentious. And I think would make for a better approach to what we're going to be dealing with often, I think. As far as now addressing B2, I think the decision we have to make here is, one, I think it has to be simple. We can't start piecing many different things together. And having sub-zoning within what we have now, because I think that gets a little bit tricky. It might get a little messy. So I think we have to be very simple. And what is the one big issue? And maybe even that's a little subjective, but what is one of the big issues? I do see it's mass, which I think tends to be a height. We always see it as height, but at the end of the day, it's about mass of a building is what we've experienced on the planning board. So I think we just have to try to stay as simple as you can.
Agree.
The concern about not having criteria, though, is that if it comes to you, planning board or to council, and there's no criteria, and you just make a subjective decision based on the way it feels or the way it looks, that's arbitrary and capricious. So you need to have some sort of criteria. So how do we get there?
If it's a rezone.
So, yeah, that makes sense you need something simple, which is the intent, but also to make it better around exactly character, scale, and context.
One of the things in the comprehensive plan.
Well, wait a minute. Some people still have not had a chance to ask questions. Jerry.
What I'd like to do is, I'd like to bring this to an end, this discussion. But what I would like to see happen is maybe for Jocelyn and your folks to get together a rough draft plan or present it to legal, just get a legal opinion, then come back to the regular city council meeting, just bring it to us, just put it out there where it is, where we stand. And I think, Doug, you bring up a good point. These guys have their own plan to get done, and now we're telling them to back burner it almost to do this. So I think that's what I would recommend here, is that they put together a plan of some sort, run it by legal, then bring it to us at a presentation, and then at our council meeting, we decide which direction to give these guys.
So I'm clear, Jerry, at a regular council meeting, you're saying, or at a study session, or one of
Or
these?
next meeting, whatever that is, so that we can keep
it moving
so we can
forward.
give
Because I
direction.
think the schedule that you've laid out puts you at the 12th of July for the,
Yeah.
It would slide that schedule.
which would be a study session. Yeah.
We could still meet that schedule, putting together scaling this back, making it more general.
Okay, but that's my recommendation, that we just do that, and so we can get out of here. We still got a lot to do.
Yeah, we have to wrap this up. I think we've given you a lot of input. My only comment is that one of the concerns that we would hope would be addressed was the issue of what was an administrative review or change, and what kind of process that was compared to something that might be spelled out in specifically in the code, or might require a public hearing. So that's one of those issues that I know you're addressing. I just want to make sure that one isn't lost.
That's this right here.
And I think I'd like to wrap it up because we do have couple other things we've got to do tonight, and we cannot put them off because we are running out of time. So let's move on to the next topic.
We have the Santa Fe Boulevard.
Yeah. The next topic with the planning board is real quick, just a follow-up on the Santa Fe and Bellevue plans. Jocelyn.
So yes, you're absolutely correct. Whoever just said it about this B2 is the 90-day. That is the priority right now. I met with the planning board chair and vice chair on the general overview of process for us and have gone out and gotten some estimates on using a consultant timeframe to take on Santa Fe corridor plan as well as the Bellevue portion. It's probably a 12 to 18 month process because it's updating. We have Santa Fe already, but it's really outdated. So it's updating that and then adding the Bellevue. So 18 months or so. And then if we were to hire a consultant, probably the cost is around $200,000. So just wanted to get some further direction from council on, is that something that you want us to, it would be after the 90 days, but start planning that so that then we're bidding that and getting that project underway this year? Or is that something that you want to roll into conversations starting for next year in the budget process?
I think absolutely. It's got to be in the budget discussion for the next year, because I don't think there's $200,000 that's available this year to do that.
Okay, just so we want to quickly just get that direction and bring that back around to everyone.
And I haven't talked to anybody in finance or anything else, but I think that we need to make sure we follow that same budget process with a budget book for anything of that value.
So what that would mean is if our intent to develop the Santa Fe corridor plan is through a consultant, then that would not begin until 2017. I just want to make sure there's that clarity.
I think that's a valid statement then, if that's the kind of money we're talking about.
Yep.
Okay, so that brings us to the next item on the budget is agenda item E.
So, just want to say thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Jocelyn. That's what I was getting at. So Jocelyn, thank you. The planning board is completed their business here tonight. Thank you to the planning board for being involved. We're going to take a little quick recess while we get ready for the next piece. We're going to take 5. We got to take 5. Okay, this brings us up, make sure the folks have us on video, and this brings us up to the new agenda item E, which is a council discussion on the 2017 budget development. And this is not intended to be a very long discussion, but it's to, this is not the big one. The big one is yet to come, but this is to just get you thinking that budget is being worked on very quickly with all the city staff. They start their work here in the next couple of weeks, and they need to hear from us if we have any specific issues before they get started, so that they're not going down the wrong path. Now, what I'd like to do is have Mike talk briefly about what the process is that the city follows, and then we want to make sure that as a council we're comfortable receiving the draft budgets in the same format that we've received them in the last 5 years, I think. And talking in terms of policy decisions, and then talk for a very brief moment on what we want them to focus on. So, Mike,
Sure.
go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So what we're proposing as an executive team, what we've discussed and what we'd like to do is continue to present to you the budgets as we have in the recent past, focusing primarily on policy questions for significant changes or significant additions, budget highlights for minor additions, and then still allow discussion on individual items if there are desire to get some more info on those. So we already, the mayor alluded to it, we already have, our budgets are actually due to finance here in the next couple days. We're in the thick of this already, and people are developing their kind of 2017 plans now. So once finance gets that, we'll have that budget ready for council, hopefully on, well, the current plan is August 31st. So we'll have a draft budget available for council to start reviewing on August 31st. What we'd like to see is, just given the process that we're running into right now, that we provide that draft budget to council, and then council provides us written comments if there's anything specific that they'd like to have explained in line items, anything like that. That way, and sometime within a 2-week period. So, for instance, if we get it to you on August 31st, we'd like to have comments back by September 12th, and then that gives us a few days to put together responses for any specific information that you'd like regarding any line items or any other department pieces. And that way, that keeps to that schedule that we're setting up, I think, of 2 to 3 days tops for budget review with council.
And what days do you anticipate those?
Those are currently set for 9/19 and 9/20. Is that correct, Doug? Okay.
19 and 20?
19 and 20, Monday and a Tuesday. Correct. And they're scheduled currently 6 to approximately 9, but it just depends on what we have going on that night. Sometimes we go a little longer. And it's the written comment piece will allow us to complete, hopefully, if we get that early enough, we can address any of those issues and allow us to move forward with kind of that aggressive time frame of 2 days. I mean, historically, we've done it in 2 to 3 days, so the desire is that we continue with that. We've heard loud and clear that street maintenance and infrastructure are a big deal. And so we are going to attempt to focus a lot of the funding that we can on those items. There still may be some staffing issues that will be considered in this budget as well. So just be on the lookout for those. We've forewarned our executive team that they've got to have a solid justification for it. It's not just throw them up and hopefully they work. So we recognize that. And you'll hear on the 12th, when we have a presentation on infrastructure pieces and how to deal with it, that we have a challenge moving forward, a significant challenge in funding, especially for infrastructure, and it won't be easy discussions.
So that's basically the staff pitch.
Yeah.
Any thoughts from council?
I'm okay with not rushing it into 2 nights. I would rather just take our time and do the 3. We used to do 4. So, don't think you have to do it 2 just for me.
Well, Then we'll save that Wednesday as well, just in case, but
So,
it'd be great if we could.
Wednesday because of Jerry.
Oh, there you go, remember that.
Thank you.
That's the first time, Jerry, I think you've ever requested a lengthier process.
Slow down. We're talking money.
Any other comments? Go, Peggy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure, thank you.
It seems to me the last couple of years, maybe 3, I'm not sure, that what is presented to us is often quite a stretch, very creative, tied to council's goals and objectives. So either we need to refine our goals and objectives, and can't do it this year, obviously, because you're right on top of all this. But I don't want to have, if council's really thinking something that's a limousine, I don't want it to appear as motorized roller skates. That is a silly statement, but it's, I'd like a little more identity there.
Sure.
Thank you.
Other comments? I've got a comment, but other comments. So just to repeat again a little bit of what Mike said, I think it's really important for council to have the opportunity to look at specific line items. Every council member has some knowledge of something, and they may have a history of it, and for them to have the ability to look at those line items is just a very important part of the oversight process. So we think by getting it out in advance and giving you time to look at it and get that back, you can do that without dragging the whole discussion down, because the other is, we do have three days now, that Jerry says, so 3 days to get through a lot of decision-making and not get caught up in the questions about the line items. Those should be resolved in advance. So, comfortable with that, Mike?
That's it.
Okay, great. Any other further discussion? And we're getting toward the end of the night. We have to talk briefly, and this is agenda item F, about have a council discussion on how we recruit and process a city manager, and if there's any discussion about an interim appointment, because we don't make that tonight, because we can't do motions, but the next meeting, we could do a motion on appointing an interim city manager, and perhaps, and we're going to hear from staff in a moment, having maybe some decisions about, based on what we say tonight about how we recruit a city manager. So for that, Mike, cheers.
The 12th is our next regular.
5th.
The 5th is your next regular meeting, 12th is your next study session. Correct. So, yes, the day
I
after.
thought when I mentioned something about coming back to us, I bet someone said it was a study session.
The next study session was the 12th.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So you were right.
Yeah.
Again. Yes.
So.
Everybody was right.
Thank you, sorry.
Sure, sorry. Eric Von Savage is here, the HR director, and he's able to speak to the recruitment piece. He was involved in the last recruitment process, and he's kind of laid out a process that for you to consider and how to go forward with the recruitment of a new city manager. So, Eric, you want to come up and have that discussion?
I'm gonna give some handouts, just so that we all kind of have similar.
So while that's handing out, what we want to be able to do is give staff some direction. And obviously, the direction is along the lines of, is this a national search? Is this a regional search? Is this a local search? Is the cost limit going to be such and such? Will there be a cost limit that we want to prescribe so that when they come back, they know what they're doing? There's a few decisions that we can ask them to direct their staff attention to, but it does have to come back to a vote of council. Eric, go ahead.
Okay, so we have
sure you're in the mic.
Okay, there we go. Is that better?
Talk a little closer to it.
All right, so one of the requests was to give an idea of what would the cost be if we went and used an executive search firm. There's a sampling here of about 5, and there's probably a good 10 to 15 search firms out there that would be interested if we were to do an RFP and solicit for a search firm. We used a search firm the last time that we looked for a city manager.
And the time before, too.
And the time before. So it's a pretty common practice to do that. There's 5 samples here, which are just to give us a ballpark idea of how the pricing kind of works. And it's a little bit all over the map because they all do things slightly differently. 3 of them are currently active in our community doing a search for a city manager, so there's some knowledge already of the area, and then I can't speak to any of the others who didn't respond. But you'll see that the pricing can vary anywhere from about $13,000 if you're doing a partial search with a firm, and then if you're doing a full search from about $16,000 up to about $35,000. You'll notice that in all of the scenarios that travel and lodging for candidates, if you are bringing them in from out of state or from across, you can probably anticipate that about a $2,000 per candidate that you want to bring in. So it's going to depend a little bit on how many candidates you want to bring in. Assuming you want to bring in about 5, you would guess probably about a $10,000 right in there for travel and lodging if you were to do that with your candidates. And that's pretty common at this level of position, that if you're bringing them in for an interview, a final interview, that you would do that. In each of these samples, you're also going to notice that they kind of all do slightly different things. They're all going to do the general thing where they are going to meet with each council member, find out what you're looking for, what you want in a candidate, and then they're going to take that information and build a profile for you. And then they'll do a brochure, they'll get the brochure out, they'll do the recruiting, and they'll screen the candidates down to the top candidates for you to review. And so that's the basic part. Then they start to get a little bit different and they start to differentiate themselves. Some of these firms will have assessment tools that are, their own proprietary assessment tools that they use. Others will have, they'll do a recruitment video, which is one of those things you do if you want to optimize your web search, because you need to have various things posted on a website in order to get your spot to rise to the top in the algorithm of the searches and those types of things. So you'll see that they are kind of different. One of the things that each of these firms will do if we ask, and so in your packet, there's a draft RFP for you to review and look at, edit, play with. But there's a request included in there for what is their guarantee. So each of them will have various scenarios about what their guarantee is. So if they do a search and the person doesn't stay for a full year, will they go redo your search for you for half the price or that type of thing? And that's where you kind of get into that when you get into your RFP process with them. So this kind of gives you a ballpark of what the cost might be. So looking at that. And then the next page is really a timeline, and that's this guy here with the loops on it. I put a timeline together that is fairly aggressive if you want to get through an RFP process, select a firm, and then have that firm selected so that by the end of August, they would be able to move forward and start the actual executive search. It would probably take them another couple months to put everything together, and then it can take a little bit longer for the final interviews, negotiating the contract. You're looking at really close towards the end of the year, beginning of the next year, depending on timelines of candidates and your timelines. So that said, going through the timeline, we would start pretty aggressively by trying to get edits back on the RFP if we were going to go forward with that by the 6th, so that we could post it, get it out there, and give the firms an opportunity to apply and give us information about what services they would do and how they would go about doing it. And then, of course, you would want to work towards, the vendors usually get an opportunity to give us questions and get clarification about what we're looking for. So we have to have that sort of incorporated in there. And we usually post those so that all vendors get the same opportunity to see what those answers look like to the questions, whether they pose the questions or not. Looking at July 22nd, we would give them a deadline then to get their proposals in, both in writing and electronic is usually how I request my RFPs. So that way you can have a hard copy that's already printed and done as of when the deadline is, and then we can also have it electronically to work with as well. We can send that around. And then we need to develop what our rubric is going to be if we were going to score them, so that we have a way to provide your group some information about how they want to move forward with who they would select. And the rubric just kind of helps narrow down your selection process and give some substance to why you're leaning towards one of the executive search firms over another, and then targeting an approval date of the 23rd, which I believe is one of your regular sessions, so you can take action to decide and select a firm.
August 23rd is actually all of this timeline that Eric's laid out, which you have about 6 months.
Okay, so the backside kind of just puts in sort of words what our deadlines would be if we were to follow this particular timeline. And then the very last RFP, and this is a draft RFP, so I can send this out if you are interested, and you can, or you can make modifications or requests for different pieces of information that you would want in there. It's this draft kind of covers what we're looking for, who we are, and then what we would expect and want in the proposal. So it would be something that you'd want to spend a little bit of time looking at, and then you can send those edits back to me a variety of ways, either electronically, or you could send it back hard copy, and then I can incorporate all those changes into one document for us to post as the RFP.
And you need those back by the 6th?
Yes.
Or by the 1st?
They would be, we would want the edits back by July 1st, so that we would have time to kind of get them incorporated.
Okay.
And that way we would be we'd actually be able to post it by July 6th. And then once it's posted, then the vendors, the executive search firms, can start putting together their proposal for us.
It's a fairly aggressive schedule. We recognize that, but this is a process, and it takes a while to do this. So we want to be sure that this meets kind of what you're thinking about.
Go ahead.
So if we get the edits back to you on the 1st, I would think that, could you get it back to us for the meeting on the 5th?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, you'd have to get it back to, yeah, it'd have to be before then.
It would have to be almost next Tuesday.
Yeah, that's not realistic.
Because we have some people out of town even.
Yeah, we're probably looking at pushing this out a couple weeks, I think, but, because I'm anticipating some people are going to make some changes, and it's going to want to go back to council. That stuff.
So Eric, just a moment of discussion about how Eric works on these issues. So Eric is really good about getting the edits from different people, putting it together, and then sending it back out again for another look. So he can do that fairly quickly. I think if we're looking at where the time crunches are, it's us getting them, looking at them, and resubmitting them. And do you have any vacation or anything scheduled in the next 6 years? Because if you do, it
Formally
changes everything.
scheduled previously.
Peppered throughout July. Other than that, I've been holding off. Yes.
So I'm talking about this aggressive schedule. It's more based on what we can do than what Eric does.
Yeah. Ultimately, I could send the edits back, and you could have time with it prior to your meeting, which is the 5th. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So if I have it's done prior to your meeting, although it's a holiday weekend, so the
And you have
1st
two
is a
council
Friday.
people that aren't here.
Yep, two
Yeah.
council that aren't here, plus posting or the packet requirements, the timing on that
Yeah.
doesn't work well.
Okay.
If they want to take it back through
The
that
council.
council
Yep.
process.
So we can push that back then. And this is a tight time. We can push this all back easily by a couple weeks and breathe a little space for council to have more time with each step.
I think we may need to do that. I think we may need to do that for us as a body rather than for you, for any, challenges that you have down there in your office. So the other thought is we should probably vote on, and I'm asking for guidance on this, a limit or a range or something to do with dollars that we're willing to spend on the recruitment process. So I'm not sure where that takes us. It's not unusual to say something like $40,000, and I'm just saying a number. And if you look at these, you see that probably might just about work for most of them, and say we that as a council, we're authorizing a search for that dollar amount, and then we would do it as a business item at a regular meeting. Any thoughts about that? And I think, Eric, I'd ask you to come up with what seems to be the right dollar amount, but I just did an executive search in another place up in urban drainage, and 40,000 was what the board said at that time, and it seemed to work.
Yeah, that, and even looking at these numbers from these 5 folks who submitted, that would keep you well within that range. So it wouldn't be unrealistic. 40,000 would be a pretty realistic number, and it would give you a fair number of options. Because you'll see some that are going to be on the much lower end and they'll offer you a different level of service. And then you'll see some that are on a higher end that are offering you a higher level of service. And you'll see some right in the middle who might have the same level of service. So I think you would be very safe by saying if we incorporated language into the RFP that stated that we are looking for proposals not to exceed whatever threshold, and 40,000 would be a reasonable number. And then you would basically allow a little expeditiousness to your process by allowing the executive search firms to self-eliminate if they were going to put a proposal in that was higher than that amount.
Right. And then one other thought for us is some executive search firms will come in at a lesser amount, but you'll find that they expect staff here to do some level of the work. And then others are a complete turnkey, really as turnkey as it could be. And I am suggesting that that's what we're really looking for, is a turnkey as much as possible.
Do you think you can get that for 40?
Yeah, I'm leaving it up to Eric to take a look, but I think that's what we just found.
Yeah, so the question is, would it be realistic to get a full turnkey for a not to exceed 40,000? And I believe that's in the market, that is a possibility. And a good possibility. So you'll notice Slavin, which is the very last group that kind of gave us an estimate, they have what they call a partial recruitment, and that partial recruitment comes in at 13,000 plus expenses, and that's certainly when they are expecting to utilize a lot of your current staff to do a lot of their legwork for them. Now you can. For a turnkey, they'll actually do the screening for you. They'll do the background checks. They'll do any variety of things up to however much you want them to do. And I think you can realistically get that for a not to exceed 40,000.
And if that's if you find it's actually 45,000 or whatever, you know, it's
But
based
we're
on your
talking
judgment.
another 10 for the candidates, right?
That was going to be my clarification
Yes.
question.
Yes, yes, you may have to do that.
Another 10, two grand per candidate if you have 5 finalists.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
you're-
depending on where they come from, where if they're traveling from the mountains or
just
from New
didn't
York.
hear.
So, yeah.
And I presume that your staff is full, your cup is full.
Our cup is quite full right now just because we're heading into
And that's
budget.
It is overflowing in HR. I will speak for Eric. So our recommendation is that you do have the full service recruitment, just because staff right now is fairly burdened with budget. And in Eric's standpoint, he's dealing with healthcare issues and a number of other issues surrounding that, so.
And it is budget.
And
So,
budget.
so what is our goal for actual hiring then? What are we anticipating?
As far as a timeline,
Yeah. When somebody might actually start?
this timeline that you have in front of you is really just to select the executive search firm. And these firms will be able to complete a search for you in 2 to 3 months fairly easily. That's kind of what they do. It's their niche. It's so if you're looking at, you know, even if we delay this a little bit and breathe a little more time into this timeline that I have here, and I'll add some other dates in there and then send it back out to you to look at and see if it makes sense. I think you're still realistically looking at end of the year, first part of the next year.
To be safe, I'd say first quarter of next year, just
Of
depending.
actually selecting?
To select and actually get someone in-house, yes.
Yeah,
Because
but I'm looking-
I think you're going
it's-
to have, depending on if they're currently working or what their current situation is, if they need to move, et cetera.
Yeah,
There's
but what
all
I'm
those pieces.
trying to get at is when might candidates show up here? And maybe they need a month or so, whatever, but when we actually would be having them here,
Interviews?
yeah.
So your interviews would be prior to the holidays. We would want to try to target it
Which
right
holiday?
before Thanksgiving.
Pardon?
You'd want to try to target it before Thanksgiving if you were to get them on board by the end of the year or New Year. Because if they are working, and particularly if they are out of state, it could take easily a month or two, especially over those holiday period, that particular timeline, for them to be able to give notice and actually move and get here and then get in position. So we would be looking at more likely first part of November or maybe late, like sometime in October, to be doing interviews.
Because I'm thinking we don't want to have this happening close to Thanksgiving. I mean, we want to somehow avoid that, because we also want, if we have done as we've done in the past, we have citizen opportunities to meet and comment, whatever.
Yep.
So we want to avoid those conflicts.
And I think, not to get too far ahead of us, but first we need to get the search firm in place so we can
Yeah,
kind of set
I'm
that
just-
schedule
yeah,
then once
I'm-
we get them there.
You know how I am. I like having the
Yeah.
more complete.
It will also be a question you'll want to ask each of the search firms, and maybe that's something we also want to incorporate into the RFP as we're looking at that, because some of them are going to be able to expedite a search if they're already sort of in this market, and others might take longer if they're not already doing an active search in this market.
Yeah.
And of the search firms that Eric has called out, I know Waters and Company, SGR, and KRW are active right now. This may say something about the city management profession, but they're active in Colorado right now, recruiting for city managers.
What was the third one, Mike? You had
The-
SGR and KRW.
It's Waters and Company, so WNC, SGR, and KRW.
Where in this process does council talk about what they want in a city manager? Because I think it's important that we try to identify that and talk honestly and openly about that among the 7 of us, so that we have agreement on that. And it's a real thing that we need to unify on, because that's a key part. If we're going to move forward successfully, we need to do that. When does that happen?
Agreed. So that'll be a component in that selection of the executive search firm. So Eric, I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, there's part of it's going to be a little bit how you want to go about doing that process. Each of these firms is going to want your input into building a profile so that they know what they're looking for and which candidates they should bring forward as your top candidates. In order for them to do that, they're either going to want to meet with you all individually or as a group or both. And so part of your vetting process for the executive search firms is going to be keeping that in the forefront of your minds when you interview them about what is it that you want. I would imagine most of them will be pretty flexible, but they also probably have some guidance for you about what's been effective in the past when they've worked with other city councils.
And is it possible for us to get a copy of the RFP we did last time?
Yes, I can locate that and I can send that out as well.
Yeah.
Yep, I can send them both together.
Another question, working with another organization that went through a management change, we had a corporate consultant type come in and work with us, and they actually recommended a longer-term interim manager, because whenever somebody leaves an organization that's been there a while, there are good things they did, there are things that aren't so good they did, and it takes a while for some of that to bubble to the surface, both sides of that. And having a longer-term interim enables the organization to stabilize a little bit and identify those factors. And I wonder if that might be something that we would entertain, to have purposefully hire an interim for a year, or I don't know what the time frame is, but a longer interim to enable us to really assess how the organization works now that we have lost a longer-term employee, so that we can identify what we really want to look for.
So the limited amount of knowledge that I have has been that there is an ability for a company to take over that management position interim. There is an ability for what they call the circuit riders in Colorado that work through CML, which are city managers, and some of them are extremely competent, that are willing to take on what is their knowledge is a temporary situation, and then there is the process of taking somebody from within the organization. Those are the what I'm available.
I would prefer the last.
Say again, Doug?
I would prefer the last option. I think there's some advantages to slowing down the process a little bit for some of the reasons you talked about, and maybe some others. I would prefer us to appoint somebody from within for that interim rather than to get an outside interim. I mean, then you have an outside interim coming in, being here for a period of time, and then being replaced by another manager. I think that's a lot of changes.
Well, am I correctly understanding, though, there's some people who specialize in interim positions?
Yeah, there are, so in discussions with Sam Mammon at CML, the executive director of CML, he mentioned that there are retired managers that do this kind of work, that come in and do interim work. It just depends on their availability and their willingness to come to this community. So it would be something that we'd have to put essentially feelers out to those individuals to see if they'd be interested in doing that kind of work. But there are people out there.
Then you're selecting an interim, going through the selection process for an interim, and then doing another selection for...
Well, on the other hand, if we select somebody inside, we're going to create some holes in the Swiss cheese here. I mean, it seems to me. I don't see anybody sitting around with lots of extra time to do something and have staff pick up the slack all the way around.
Let me ask staff what they think. I mean, you actually come into closer contact with that than we do on a daily basis. It is an interim. Do you have any feel what would be best for our staff? This is what makes the city tick.
So I know there are a number of staff that are concerned with what's going on. They want more information. They want to be they'd really prefer someone from internally, I guess, to really move up into that position. ultimately depends on, this is your employee. Right? This is council's employee. So understanding where you're at, where you think you'll be most comfortable, and then also from what we've heard from our staff and from the executive team and those folks, they'd prefer someone internally, but up to you guys.
So, yeah, we're at 10 o'clock, we need to quit. I think it's important to pass on to you, though, in my talking to Mike and where he feels he's at, why don't you go ahead and...
Sure, and in discussions that I've had with Bruce and with others, I really like being the deputy. Just so you realize that.
That was extraordinarily diplomatic, Mike.
So assisting a manager is my forte, and that's kind of what I've done through much of my career. And so I don't know that I'm necessarily interested or the appropriate person at this time to step into that role, but I think there are others who would be interested on staff that I'd be more than willing to support and assist. And I recognize that's going to be my role in doing a lot of this work, is supporting and assisting whoever you select.
So where do we go?
Well, I think what we want to do is have anybody on staff that's interested, just contact you.
Sure.
And then make that information available to council. Then we've just, really be good if we could make the appointment at the next Tuesday meeting, but we're not going to be doing interviews and all those kinds of things. We're going to have to take it on faith.
So they should go to the deputy, not HR?
Well, they could go to HR. They could go to the HR.
How do you handle
Either
these
or.
things internally?
Well,
What do you want to do?
it will be part of the discussion tomorrow at the executive team. And then from there, if Eric wants to gather them.
Well, Mike, thanks for stepping into the breach. I know it has been a difficult week for everybody and for the community at large. So thank you for being there.
Okay, we're adjourned.